Hello, everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. It was April of 1979, and I was in my senior year of high school. The plan was simple, something we'd talked about for weeks. My buddy had a cousin with a place way out in Denellen, Florida, just a small house surrounded by nothing but woods and swampland. The skies out there were supposed to be incredible for stargazing, completely free of the city light pollution that always messed with my long exposure shots. I'd saved up for a decent camera, a Pentax K1000, and I was itching to get some real astrophotography done. We drove out there on a Friday afternoon, 3 of us crammed into my beat-up Ford Pinto. The air was already thick and warm, the kind of sticky Florida heat that clings to your skin. The house was exactly as described, a small, weathered wooden structure with a screened-in porch sitting at the end of a long, unpaved road that seemed to dissolve into the trees. We spent the first few hours just goofing around, listening to music on a transistor radio, the signal fading in and out with static. As the sun started to dip, painting the sky in oranges and purples, I started getting my gear ready. The excitement was a physical buzz in my chest. This was going to be my big project. By 10:30 that night, the sky was a deep, velvety black, dotted with more stars than I'd ever seen in my life. It was perfect. We decided to walk a little way down the dirt road that led away from the house to get completely clear of the single porch light. The darkness out there was absolute. The beam from my flashlight was a weak yellow cone, just barely cutting through the inky blackness, making the Spanish moss hanging from the oaks look like skeletal fingers. I found a decently flat spot and started setting up my tripod. My friends were a few yards behind me, their low voices and the occasional laugh the only human sounds. The night was alive with the usual chorus of crickets and frogs, a constant, reassuring hum. I was fiddling with the camera, trying to get the focus just right on the Milky Way, which was a faint, smeared band of light overhead. That's when I caught the first whiff of it. It was a smell that hit the back of my throat and just stuck there. It wasn't a skunk. I knew what a skunk smelled like. This was worse. It was a pungent, foul odor, like a mix of rotten meat, wet dog, and something else I couldn't place, something deeply organic and wrong. It was so strong it made my eyes water a little. I wrinkled my nose and called back to my friends, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet. "You guys smell that?" There was a pause, then one of them laughed. "Yeah, man, must be the skunk ape." We all chuckled. The skunk ape was a local legend, Florida's version of Bigfoot. It was a joke, something you brought up to scare tourists or little kids. We'd all heard the stories, but none of us took them seriously. It was just a fun bit of local folklore, but the laughter died down quickly. Another one of my friends, his voice now quieter, more serious, said, "No, seriously, I smell it too." And then, in the space of a single breath, I noticed the silence. The crickets had stopped, the frogs had stopped. The entire forest, which had been a vibrant, noisy ecosystem just moments before, had gone completely and utterly quiet. It was a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight pressing down on my ears. It was the kind of silence you only hear right before a bad storm, but there wasn't a cloud in the sky. My skin started to crawl. This wasn't right. I slowly straightened up from my camera, my heart beginning to thump a little harder against my ribs. I swept my flashlight beam across the wall of trees to my left, where the smell seemed to be coming from. The beam just bounced off the dense, dark foliage, not penetrating more than a few feet. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel something. It's hard to explain, but it was a primal feeling, a deep, gut-level awareness that we were not alone out here, that something was in those woods with us, and it was watching. I looked back at my friends. Their faces were pale in the dim light, their eyes wide. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The same raw, electric fear was passing between us. One of them, the one who had joked about the skunk ape, just shook his head slowly, his eyes locked on the tree line. Then, without a single word, he turned and started running back towards the house. It wasn't a jog. It was a full-on, panic-stricken sprint. The other friend was half a second behind him. My body reacted before my brain could even form a complete thought. A jolt of pure adrenaline shot through me, so sharp and cold it was almost painful. I grabbed my camera from the tripod, fumbling with the quick-release plate in my panic. My fingers felt thick and clumsy. I didn't even bother to collapse the tripod properly. I just yanked the legs together, the metal clacking loudly in the suffocating silence, and I ran. I ran like I've never run before or since. The heavy tripod and camera banged against my leg with every pounding step. The beam from my flashlight jittered and danced wildly across the dirt road, making the shadows leap and twist. I could hear my own ragged, gasping breaths, and the thunder of my heart was all I could hear in the dead quiet night. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. The feeling of being watched was so intense it felt like a hot brand between my shoulder blades. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me that something was right behind me, that if I stumbled, if I slowed down for even a second, it would be on me. I burst onto the porch, my friends slamming the screen door shut behind me. We all stood there for a moment, chests heaving, staring out into the blackness we'd just escaped. Nobody said a word. We just listened. The silence from outside was absolute. The normal night sounds didn't return. We stood there frozen for what felt like an hour, just waiting, straining our ears for any sound from the woods. There was nothing. Finally, one of us flipped the deadbolt on the main door. The click was deafening. We spent the rest of the night in the living room with all the lights on, not talking much. Every creak of the old house made us jump. We tried to rationalize it. A bear, maybe, a panther, but we all knew. Bears don't smell like that, and neither of them could create that kind of profound, terrifying silence. We had all felt the same thing out there, a presence, something intelligent, and something that knew we were there. Sleep was impossible. I just sat on the couch, my camera held tight in my lap, staring at the locked door until the first grey light of dawn began to filter through the windows. When the sun was fully up, casting a weak, safe light over everything, we finally worked up the nerve to go back outside. The world looked normal again. Birds were chirping. The air was fresh and clean, the foul smell completely gone. It was hard to believe the terror of the night before had been real, but we had to know. We had to go back to that spot. We walked down the dirt road slowly, cautiously, like we were approaching a crime scene. The spot where I'd set up my tripod was easy to find. My footprints were there in the soft dirt, and then we saw it. Just off the road, maybe 15 feet into the tree line, there was a patch of ground that was different. The underbrush, ferns and palmetto plants, was completely matted down. It wasn't just trampled, it was flattened, like something very heavy had been lying there or standing there for a long time. The area was roughly rectangular, about 4 feet by 5 feet. The ground in the middle of it was damp, darker than the surrounding soil, as if something had been sweating or the moisture had been pressed out of it. My eyes scanned the perimeter of this matted area, and that's when my breath caught in my throat. There, pressed clearly into the soft, dark earth at the edge of the flattened vegetation, was a single footprint. It was enormous. I knelt down, my knees pressing into the cool, damp soil. My friends hovered behind me, their silence saying everything. I pulled out a ruler I kept in my camera bag for scale. The print was 18 inches long from the back of the heel to the tip of the toes. It was hard to tell. The shape was vaguely human-like, but so much larger than any human foot could possibly be. It was about 8 inches wide at the ball, narrowing to a heel. The depth was incredible too, a good 2 inches deep in the firm soil. You'd need an immense amount of weight to make an impression like that, and there were no claw marks. It wasn't a bear. A bear print looks completely different, with claws clearly visible. This was different. This was something else. My hands were trembling as I loaded a fresh roll of black and white film into my Pentax. The color was gone from the world, everything rendered in shades of gray through my viewfinder. I took multiple shots of the footprint from different angles, placing the ruler next to it for scale. I took photos of the entire matted down area, trying to capture the sheer size of it. The silence among us was heavy, respectful, and scared. We weren't joking anymore. This was real. This was proof. We didn't talk about it on the drive home. We didn't talk about it with anyone. We had an unspoken agreement to keep it to ourselves. Who would believe us? We were just a bunch of kids. They'd say we made it up, that it was a hoax, that we'd mistaken a bear track. We'd be laughed out of town. So, the photos went into an envelope, and the envelope went into the bottom of my desk drawer. The memory got tucked away in a dark corner of my mind, too strange and too frightening to examine too closely. But I never forgot the feeling. The sudden, suffocating silence, the gut-churning smell, the primal, heart-pounding terror that sent us running without a single word, and that footprint, that impossible 18-inch-long footprint pressed into the Florida soil. It's been years, but I still have those photos. Sometimes I take them out and look at them, the grainy black and white images of something I can't explain. They're my proof that one night in April, in the woods of Denellen, something was watching us from the dark, something big, something that shouldn't exist, and to this day I have no idea what it was. Story 2. It was a Saturday in early October, and my friend and I decided to go fishing in this canyon, out in New Mexico. We'd been there a couple times before. It's this remote spot, not too far from the Gila National Forest, but deep enough that you don't see many people. The drive-in is rough, just a dirt road that winds through scrubland before dropping into the canyon. We left around 6 in the morning, got there by 8, and the air was still cool, with that dry desert smell mixed with pine from the higher elevations. My friend's truck bounced over the ruts, and we parked near the trailhead, then hiked down to the river with our gear. The canyon itself is beautiful, but in a lonely kind of way. The walls are steep, covered in juniper and pinon pine, and the river cuts through the middle, clear and fast-moving. We found a spot where the water widened into a pool, perfect for trout. We set up our rods, cracked open a couple beers, and just relaxed. For the first hour or so, everything was normal. Birds were chirping, the sun was warming up, and I remember thinking how peaceful it was. My friend was joking around, talking about work, and I was just enjoying the quiet. But then, around 10 in the morning, things started to feel off. It wasn't anything obvious at first, just a creeping sense that someone was watching us. I've been in the woods plenty of times, and you get used to the feeling of animals around, but this was different. It was like a weight on the back of my neck, this prickle that made me keep turning around to look behind me. My friend noticed it too. He stopped talking mid-sentence and just scanned the trees across the river. "You feel that?" he asked, and I nodded. We both shrugged it off at first, thinking maybe it was a deer or something. Then the forest went silent. 1 minute, there were birds and insects buzzing, and the next, nothing. Absolutely dead quiet. It was so sudden it made my skin crawl. I've heard about that happening before predators show up, but I've never experienced it like that. It wasn't just quiet. It was like the air itself had thickened, and every sound we made, like the crunch of our boots on gravel, seemed way too loud. My friend whispered, "What the hell?" And we both stood still, listening. The river was still rushing, but everything else was mute. That's when I saw the brush shaking on the other side of the river. It was about 50 yards away across the water in a thicket of scrub oak and manzanita. At first, I thought it was the wind, but there was no wind. The leaves weren't rustling. It was more like something big was pushing through, slow and deliberate. The branches were swaying in a way that didn't look natural, like whatever it was. It was heavy, I pointed, and my friend saw it too. We both froze, rods in hand, just staring. Then I heard this low moan. It wasn't loud, but it carried over the river, deep and guttural, like nothing I've ever heard. Not a bear, not a coyote. I've heard those before. This was lower, almost human-like, but not quite, with a raspy edge that made my stomach clench. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I remember my hands getting sweaty, and I had to wipe them on my jeans. My friend muttered, "We should go." But we didn't move right away. We were both trying to figure out what it was. The brush kept shaking, and then I realized it was moving parallel to us, staying on the other side of the river but mirroring our position. We were standing near the water's edge, and it was keeping pace, like it was tracking us. Every time we took a step, the rustling would shift slightly downstream. I started feeling this raw fear, the kind that makes your legs feel weak. I've been scared in the woods before. Once I stumbled on a mountain lion, and another time I got lost overnight. But this was different. This felt predatory, like we were being hunted. The silence made it worse. It was so oppressive, like the whole forest was holding its breath. My friend's face was pale, and he kept licking his lips, his eyes darting around. "Let's get back to camp," he said, his voice tight. We started packing up our gear, trying to be quick but not panic, but my hands were shaking so bad I dropped my fishing reel. As I bent to pick it up, I glanced across the river and saw a gap in the brush where something was standing. I didn't get a clear look. It was mostly shadowy and tall, way taller than a person with a bulky shape. But I saw enough to know it wasn't any animal I recognize. It was just there for a second. Then it melted back into the trees, but that image is burned into my brain. Dark, almost black, and moving with this eerie smoothness. That's when I lost it. I just grabbed my backpack and said, "Run!" My friend didn't need telling twice. We took off, scrambling up the bank away from the river. The trail back to camp is about a half-mile, mostly uphill, through rocky terrain and dense trees. I was in front and I could hear my friend breathing hard behind me. We were running full tilt, not looking back, but I could still hear that low moan every few seconds, and it seemed like it was getting closer, even though we were putting distance between us and the river. About halfway up, my foot caught on a root or something and I went down hard. My ankle twisted under me and I felt this sharp pain shoot up my leg. I cried out and my friend skidded to a stop to help me up. "You okay?" he asked, his voice shaky. I nodded, but I could already feel my ankle swelling. I had to limp, leaning on him, and we slowed down a lot. That's when the fear really set in. Because even though we were moving slower, the sounds from across the river had stopped, but the feeling of being watched intensified. It was like whatever it was had crossed the river and was now on our side, following us. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but I didn't see anything, just trees and shadows that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. The forest was still dead silent, except for our panting and the crunch of our footsteps. My ankle was throbbing with every step, and I had to bite my lip to keep from crying out. The pain was bad, but the terror was worse. I felt like something was right behind us, just out of sight, waiting. My friend was muttering, come on," under his breath, and I could feel his arm trembling where I was leaning on him. We finally made it to the edge of the camp, which was just a cleared spot with our tent and a fire pit. As soon as we broke into the open, the silence broke too. Birds started chirping again, like someone flipped a switch. It was so sudden it made me jump. We collapsed near the tent, both of us breathing like we'd run a marathon. My friend helped me sit down, and I propped my injured ankle on a log. It was already turning purple, and I knew I'd sprained it bad. We just sat there for a few minutes, not talking, listening to the normal sounds of the forest return. It should have been a relief, but it wasn't. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my chest. My friend finally said, "What the hell was that?" And I shook my head. I had no idea. We both kept staring back toward the river, half expecting to see something come out of the trees. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear, or a weird echo, or even some kind of prank, but nothing fit. The way it paralleled us, the silence, that moan. It wasn't like any animal behavior I've ever heard of. Bears don't stalk you like that. They're usually more direct or avoidant. This felt intelligent, like it was playing with us. And the vocalization. It wasn't a growl or a roar. It was low, almost mournful, but with this underlying menace that made my hair stand on end. We packed up camp as fast as we could, even though my ankle was killing me. My friend had to help me to the truck, and we drove out of there without looking back. The whole way home, we barely spoke. Every time we hit a bump, my ankle would ache, reminding me of why we'd run. When we got back to town, I went to the clinic and got my ankle wrapped up. The doctor asked what happened, and I just said I tripped while hiking. I didn't mention the rest. Who would believe it? That was months ago, and I still think about it every day. I've gone over it in my head 1,000 times, trying to make sense of it, but I can't. The terror wasn't just in what I saw or heard. It was in the silence and the feeling of being stalked, like we were prey in its territory. I've never felt so small and vulnerable. My friend doesn't like to talk about it. He just changes the subject if I bring it up, but I know it affected him too. We haven't been back to that canyon, and I don't think I ever will. Sometimes when I'm alone at night, I'll hear a sound outside and my heart will start racing, and I'll remember that low moan. I don't know what it was, and I probably never will. All I know is that something was out there that day, and it knew we were there, and it wanted us to know it was watching. I've never been so scared in my life, and I doubt I ever will be again. Story 3. I never thought I'd be writing this down anywhere, but I can't stop thinking about it, and maybe getting it out will help, or maybe it'll just scare the hell out of me all over again. Either way, here goes. It was a Friday evening in late September. The air had that first real bite of autumn, the kind that makes you glad you wore a thicker jacket. My buddy and I had decided to go out to Clendening Lake, just outside of Cadiz. We'd been there 100 times before. It's not a big lake, more of a large pond, really, surrounded by thick woods on 3 sides, with a gravel access road on the 4th. It's quiet, usually just a few locals fishing for bass or catfish. That night, it was just us. We got there around 5 o'clock, the sun already starting to dip behind the trees, painting the sky in oranges and purples. We set up on our usual spot, a little muddy bank near a cluster of pine trees. We had our cooler of beer, our rods, a tackle box full of lures we probably didn't need. It was normal, perfectly, completely normal. For the first hour or so, it was just the sound of our lines plopping into the water, the occasional crack of a beer can opening, us talking about work, about football, about nothing important. The kind of easy silence and chatter you only get with a friend you've known for years. The first scream happened just as the last sliver of sun vanished. It didn't sound like an animal. That's the first thing that sticks with me. I've heard foxes, I've heard bobcats. This was different. It was sharp, piercing, and it sounded human, but not quite. It was too high, too raw, like someone was being torn apart, but also mimicking the idea of a scream. It came from the woods to our left, maybe 100 yards away, deep in the trees. We both froze. My fishing rod was halfway through a cast, and I just stopped, my arm in the air. My friend was sitting on his cooler, and he slowly put his beer down on the ground. We looked at each other, and I saw my own confusion and a little spark of fear mirrored in his face. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. His voice was tight. Before I could even form a guess, it came again. Same sound, that horrible, shrieking yell. But this time, it wasn't from the left. It was from further around the lake, more in front of us. The sound traveled across the water, clear and unnerving. It repeated 3, maybe 4 times, each one from a slightly different direction. like whatever was making it was moving fast, circling us. It wasn't just moving, it felt like it was triangulating. The woods had gone completely silent. No crickets, no frogs, no rustle of leaves. It was as if every other living thing had shut up to listen or to hide. My friend, he's braver than me, or maybe just more impulsive. He stood up, cupped his hands around his mouth, and shouted into the darkness that was now swallowing the woods. "Hey, who's out there?" We stood there, holding our breath, waiting for a laugh, for a shout back, for an apology from some drunk kid playing a prank. The silence that followed was heavier than the screams. It was a physical weight pushing down on us. Then it responded. It wasn't a scream this time. It was a sound I can't properly describe. It was like his "hey" was thrown back at us, but distorted, twisted. It was the same pitch, the same length, but it was hollow, like it was coming from a giant empty pipe. There was no emotion in it, no question, just a perfect, eerie echo of his own voice. But it wasn't an echo. Echoes don't move. This sound came from a new spot, back to our right now. My blood went cold. I don't mean that as a figure of speech. I felt a literal chill wash over me from my scalp down to my feet. This wasn't a person. No person could move that fast through that thick underbrush without making a sound, and no person could make a noise like that. "Okay, that's it," I said, my voice shaking. "We need to go." But my friend, he just shook his head, his eyes wide. "And run towards the road in the dark with that thing out there? It's between us and the truck." He was right. My truck was parked about 200 yards away, up the gravel road. To get to it, we'd have to walk along the lake's edge and then up the road, with the thickest part of the woods on one side. The thing had just demonstrated it could move around the lake perimeter in seconds. The idea of walking that gauntlet in the near dark was unthinkable. So we did the stupidest thing imaginable. We decided to stay. We sat back down, picked up our rods with trembling hands, and tried to pretend we were just fishing. It was the most absurd performance of our lives. We weren't talking anymore. We were just two guys, sitting rigidly, staring at our fishing lines, listening. The woods were still silent. Every few minutes, one of us would whisper, "You hear anything?" And the other would just shake his head. The tension was a live wire running between us. I could feel the pulse thumping in my neck. My hands were so cold I could barely feel the fishing rod. I kept scanning the tree line, but it was just a wall of blackness now. The moon wasn't up yet, and the stars felt dim and far away. Then the splashes started. They were out in the middle of the lake, not little fish jumps. These were heavy, powerful, violent splashes. Kerploosh! Like someone was heaving cinder blocks into the water. Then another, a few seconds later, closer to our side. Then another, even closer. We both stood up again, backing away from the water's edge. We couldn't see anything on the dark surface of the lake, just the expanding rings from the impacts glowing faintly in the starlight. The splashes kept coming, moving in a semicircle around our position. It was herding us. That's the only word for it. It was in the water or on the other side, and it was using these huge splashes to push us away from the lake, to funnel us towards the one escape route, the road. We didn't need to be told twice. We were done. The fishing was over. We started packing up, our movements frantic and uncoordinated. We weren't careful with the rods. We just reeled in the lines and tossed them in the truck bed. We shoved the tackle box and the cooler in, not caring about the mess. The whole time, the feeling of being watched was so intense, it was like a pressure on my skin. It wasn't a vague feeling. It was a specific, intelligent attention. I felt like I was being studied, sized up. We were being allowed to leave, but on its terms. We started hustling up the gravel road, the beam from my flashlight dancing wildly ahead of us. We didn't run, but we walked as fast as we could without breaking into a full sprint. The gravel crunched loudly under our boots, the only sound besides our ragged breathing. I kept the light pointed at the woods to our left, expecting to see a pair of eyes reflected back at me, but I saw nothing. Just endless dark trees. My truck was only 50 yards away now. I could see its dark shape. Safety. I fumbled in my pocket for the keys, my fingers numb and clumsy. That's when the rock landed. I didn't hear it whistle through the air. I just heard the loud, definitive thwack of it hitting the gravel, and then the skittering sound as it bounced. My flashlight beam snapped towards the sound. There it was, a rock about the size of a softball, sitting just 5 feet from the driver's side door of my truck. It hadn't been dropped, it had been thrown, and it had been thrown with immense force to cover that distance from the tree line. That was the terror moment. The scream was scary, the splashes were terrifying, but this was different. This was a direct, calculated and physical interaction. It wasn't just trying to scare us away anymore, it was demonstrating its presence, its power, and its accuracy. It was telling us it could hit us if it wanted to. I yelled out, a short, sharp, involuntary sound of pure fear. What the fuck? It wasn't a question. It was just a noise ripped out of me. I spun around, shining the light back into the woods we just left. Nothing. No movement, no sound, no response. Get in the truck! Get in the truck! My friend was screaming, his voice cracking. He was already yanking open the passenger door. I didn't need telling twice. I practically fell into the driver's seat, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought I might be sick. I shoved the key into the ignition, my hands shaking so violently I missed twice. The engine roared to life. I didn't even take the time to put on my seatbelt. I slammed the gear shift into drive and stomped on the gas. The tires spun on the gravel, spitting rocks behind us as we fishtailed onto the road. I didn't let off the gas. I kept my foot pressed to the floor, the engine screaming, the truck bouncing violently over the potholes in the dirt road. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I couldn't. I was too afraid of what I might see standing in the road behind us, or worse, chasing us. We didn't speak for the first 10 minutes. We just drove. The only sounds the roar of the engine and our heavy breathing. The cab of the truck smelled like lake water, sweat and fear. I finally had to slow down because my hands were cramping from gripping the steering wheel so tight. My friend was the first to speak, his voice a hoarse croak. What was that? I just shook my head. I had no answer. I still don't. We didn't encounter some mythical beast. We didn't see a big, hairy monster. We experienced something. Something intelligent. Something that knew how to use sound to disorient us. How to use the water and the terrain to manipulate our movement. Something that could throw a rock with the precision of a major league pitcher from God knows how far in the dark. It wasn't a random animal. An animal would have attacked or fled. This thing. It played with us, it corralled us, it made sure we knew we were not welcome, and it made sure we knew it was in complete control the entire time. The most chilling part, the part that keeps me up at night, isn't the scream or the rock. It's the intelligence behind it all. It was aware of us in a way that feels deeply, profoundly wrong. It wasn't just a creature in the woods. It was a presence, a mind. We got back to town and just sat in my driveway for another 20 minutes, not saying a word, just trying to process it. We haven't really talked about it since. What is there to say? We went fishing. Something in the woods knew we were there, and it made sure we knew it knew. I haven't been back to Glendining Lake. I don't think I ever will. Every time I close my eyes, I can still hear that perfect hollow mimic of my friend's voice, and I can see that rock sitting on the gravel 5 feet from my door. A warning, a message. I just wish I knew what it was trying to say. Story 4. I'd taken this back road to avoid the highway, Route 261 I think it was, because it cuts through some swampy wooded areas and usually shaves a few minutes off the trip. My car was an old beat-up Ford Taurus, the kind that rattled if you went over 60, but it got me where I needed to go. That night, the air was thick and humid, the kind that sticks to your skin even with the windows rolled up. I had the radio on low, just some staticky classic rock station, but I wasn't really listening. My mind was on getting home, crashing into bed, and forgetting about the work week ahead. The road was narrow, lined with dense pines and cypress trees that leaned in like they were watching. Their shadows stretched across the asphalt in my headlights, making everything feel closed in. Every now and then, I'd pass a dirt driveway or a broken-down mailbox, but mostly it was just darkness. No streetlights out there, just the moon peeking through the clouds now and then. I remember feeling a little on edge, but I brushed it off. Late-night drives always made me jumpy, especially in the middle of nowhere. Then, out of nowhere, this smell hit me. It was awful, like rotten meat left out in the sun for days. I actually gagged and rolled up the window, thinking maybe a dead possum or something was nearby. The air conditioner was busted, so I had to crank the window back down a crack just to breathe. That smell, though, it clung to everything, sour and heavy. I remember my eyes watering a bit, and I slowed down, squinting into the darkness ahead. That's when I saw the first thing, a little animal darting across the road. At first, I thought it was a fox because it was small and quick, with a bushy tail. It zipped from the right side to the left, and I eased off the gas, not wanting to hit it. But then, right after it, something else moved. Big, dark. It came out of the trees on the right, leaping across the road in one fluid motion, from right to left, just like the fox had. Except this thing was huge, tall enough that I had to tilt my head up to see it fully in my headlights. I swerved. Instinct, I guess. My hands clenched the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white, and the car jerked to the left, tires skidding on the gravel shoulder. For a second, I thought I was going to spin out or hit a tree, but I managed to straighten up, my heart hammering in my chest like it was trying to break out. I didn't stop, though. I couldn't. I just kept driving, but I glanced in the rearview mirror, and that's when I got a clearer look. The thing was on 2 feet, standing upright, and it was slender but tall, 6 or 7 feet, easy. Its fur was a reddish auburn color, kind of matted and shaggy, like it had been rolling in mud. But what got me were the eyes. They glowed in my headlights, not like an animal's reflective eyes, but this weird pale yellow that seemed to cut through the dark. It didn't move like a bear or anything I'd ever seen. It was too graceful, almost human-like in the way it stood there, just staring after my car. I only saw it for a couple of seconds, but it felt like forever. My skin went cold, and I could feel the sweat beading on my forehead, even though the night was cool. I remember my breath catching in my throat, and I had to force myself to look back at the road. My hands were shaking so bad I had to grip the wheel tighter to keep from veering. The smell was still there too, lingering in the car, like it had seeped in through the vents. I rolled up the window all the way, but it didn't help much. That stench of dead animal mixed with something else, earthy, like wet soil and decay. It made my stomach churn. For the next few miles, I drove faster than I should have, my eyes darting between the road and the rear-view mirror, half expecting to see it following me. But there was nothing. Just darkness and those trees, closing in again. The radio had cut out completely by then, nothing but static, so I turned it off. The silence was worse. All I could hear was the hum of the engine and my own ragged breathing. I kept replaying what I'd seen in my head, trying to make sense of it. Was it a bear? But bears don't stand that tall or move like that. And the eyes, they weren't right. Nothing about it was right. I started noticing little things I hadn't before, like how the hair on my arms was standing up, or how my mouth had gone dry. I reached for the water bottle in the cup holder, but my hand was trembling so much I spilled some on my jeans. The cold wetness snapped me back a little, but the fear was still there, a tight knot in my chest. I kept checking the speedometer, making sure I wasn't going too fast, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to get out of there, fast. The road curved ahead, and I slowed down, my foot hovering over the brake. That's when I saw something move in the trees to my left, a shadow maybe, or just my imagination, but it was big, and it seemed to keep pace with the car for a second. I gripped the wheel harder, my palms slick with sweat. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I glanced over, and for a split second I thought I saw those glowing eyes again, deeper in the woods. Then it was gone. Maybe it was nothing, just branches shifting in the wind. But my heart was pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I don't know how long I drove like that, hyper-aware of every sound and movement. The smell started to fade after a while, but the memory of it stuck with me. I kept thinking about that creature, how it had leapt across the road so smoothly, like it was chasing the fox or something. Was it hunting? The thought made me shiver. I'd never believed in any of that Bigfoot stuff before, but in that moment, it was all I could think of. Not the cartoonish version, but something real and terrifying. As I got closer to Colombia, the roads got busier with occasional headlights from other cars. Normally, that would have been a relief, but that night, it just made me feel exposed. What if someone else saw it? What if it was still out there? I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see those glowing eyes in the distance, but there was nothing, just the normal world, moving on like nothing had happened. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for a few minutes, just breathing. My legs felt weak when I got out, and I hurried inside, locking the door behind me. I didn't sleep much that night. Every little noise made me jump, the creak of the floorboards, the wind outside. I kept the lights on, which I never do, and I must have checked the locks a dozen times. The next day I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear with some kind of disease or a trick of the light, but the details didn't fit. The height, the way it moved on 2 feet, the eyes, the smell. It was all wrong. I thought about going back to look for evidence, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. What would I even find? Tracks. I'm no tracker, and the idea of being out there alone again made my skin crawl. I never reported it to anyone. Who would I tell? The police? They'd think I was crazy or drunk, and I hadn't been drinking that night. My friends would have laughed it off. So I kept it to myself, but it stayed with me all these years. Sometimes, when I'm driving late at night, I'll catch a whiff of something rotten or see a shadow move, and my heart will skip a beat. I don't know what I saw that night in Williamsburg County, but it wasn't anything normal. It was something out there in the dark, something that shouldn't exist, and I can't explain it, not even to myself. Story 5. It was one of those summers that felt like it would never end, in the best way possible. I must have been about 8 years old. We were up at my grandpa's cabin in Pennsylvania, not far from Gettysburg. The place was old, built by my great-grandfather, and it sat nestled in the woods, about halfway up this big, wooded mountain. The trees were so thick you could barely see the sky in some spots, just a patchwork of green and shadows. I loved it there. It was an adventure every single day. But this one night is the reason I still get a tight feeling in my chest when I smell pine needles and damp earth. I was sleeping in the small bedroom right next to the front door. My parents and Grandpa were in the rooms further down the hall. My room had a window that looked out onto the front porch. It was just a simple curtained window, and at night, if the moon was bright enough, you could see the shapes of the porch railing through the thin fabric. I'd gone to bed like any other night. The sounds of the woods were my lullaby. Crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl, the leaves rustling in the breeze. I fell asleep easily. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but the house was completely silent. The kind of silent that feels heavy, like a blanket pressing down on you. The crickets had stopped. Everything had stopped. That was the first thing that felt wrong. I was just lying there, blinking in the dark, trying to figure out what had woken me when I heard it. Thump. A heavy, solid sound from the porch, like someone had dropped a sack of potatoes onto the wooden planks. My heart, which had been beating slow and sleepy, suddenly kicked into a frantic, painful rhythm. I held my breath, my ears straining against the silence. Then came the steps. They weren't normal footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, and heavy. Each one landed with a weight that made the old porch boards groan and creak in a way I'd never heard before. It wasn't the pitter-patter of a raccoon or the skittering of a squirrel. This was big, and between each step there was this awful, scraping, dragging sound. Like whatever it was couldn't or wouldn't fully lift its feet. I was frozen. My whole body went stiff, my fingers clutching the edge of my scratchy wool blanket. I was staring straight at the window. The curtain was closed, but the moonlight was casting everything in a pale, silvery glow, turning the room into a world of greys and deep blacks. The steps came closer. Creak, drag, creak, drag. It was moving along the porch right past my window. I could hear the sound moving from one side of the window frame to the other. My eyes were glued to the curtain, and then I saw it, a shadow. It passed by the window and it blocked out the moonlight for a solid 3 or 4 seconds. It was tall, not giant, but tall. It was hunched over, its shoulders up high, and it had a big head. That's what I remember most, the shape of the head. It wasn't pointy like a deer's or a dog's. It wasn't round like a bear's. It was blocky, almost human, but not quite. It was set right on top of these broad, hunched shoulders, with no real neck to speak of. The silhouette was just wrong. It moved with this slow, heavy purpose, and the dragging sound followed it like a ghost. My heart wasn't just pounding anymore. It was slamming against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I could feel the pulse in my neck, in my ears. My mouth was so dry it felt like it was full of dust. I remember thinking, don't move. If you don't move, it can't see you. It was a kid's logic, the same kind you use when you're hiding under the covers from a monster. But this wasn't under the covers. This was real. I didn't scream. I didn't even whimper. I just sat there, propped up on my elbows, watching that shadow slide across my curtain until it was gone. The footsteps continued. The heavy, dragging steps moving past my window and down the length of the porch. Towards the far end of the house, the sound slowly faded, swallowed by the oppressive silence. I didn't move for what felt like an hour. I just listened, straining to hear anything else, but there was nothing. No more steps, no more creaks, just that heavy, waiting silence. Finally, my body unlocked. I slowly, so slowly, slid back down under the covers. I didn't just pull the blanket over my head. I yanked it, wrapping it tightly around me like a cocoon, making sure not a single part of me was exposed. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to convince myself it was a dream, a weird waking dream from eating too much s'mores. I could smell the faint scent of laundry detergent and my own fear sweat inside the blanket cave. I remember the rough texture of the wool against my cheek and the way my own hot breath made the space under there humid and suffocating. I must have fallen asleep out of pure exhaustion, because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through the thin curtains, and I could hear my mum clanking around in the kitchen, making coffee. I lay there for a few minutes, the events of the night before feeling distant and fuzzy, like a bad dream already starting to dissolve. The terror was still there, a cold stone in my gut, but the bright, cheerful morning light made it seem silly. It was probably just a bear, I told myself. A big, clumsy bear walking on its hind legs. Yeah, that had to be it. I got out of bed, my legs feeling a little weak. The wooden floor was cool under my bare feet. I walked over to the window and hesitated for a second before pulling the curtain aside. The porch looked normal. The old rocking chair, the potted fern my grandpa insisted on keeping alive, the worn-out welcome mat. Everything was drenched in morning sun. I felt a wave of relief. It was just a dream. I went through the morning routine on autopilot, ate my cereal, listened to my grandpa talk about the weather, nodded along as my dad planned a fishing trip for later. But that cold stone in my gut wouldn't go away. I kept glancing out the kitchen window towards the front porch. After breakfast, when everyone was distracted, my dad was reading the paper, my mum was cleaning up, my grandpa was tinkering with something in the shed. I saw my chance. I slipped out the front door, closing it as quietly as I could behind me. The morning air was cool and fresh. Birds were chirping. It was a perfect summer day. I walked to the edge of the porch, near my window, my eyes scanning the clean, swept wooden planks. My grandpa was a stickler for a clean porch. He swept it every single evening. And then I saw it. Right below my windowsill, pressed into the fine layer of dust and pollen that had settled overnight, was a footprint. It wasn't a bear print. I'd seen bear prints before in the mud near the creek. They were roundish, with claws. This was different. It was long, really long and wide. It looked like a human foot, but stretched, like if a really big man had walked barefoot, but his feet were too long and his toes were too spread out. I could see the outline of the whole foot, the arch, the ball, and the toes. The toes weren't all lined up neatly. They were splayed, and the big one was distinct, separate from the others. The print was pressed deep into the dust, showing an incredible weight. I just stood there, staring at it. The bright morning sun seemed to dim for a second. The cheerful bird songs felt like they were coming from a million miles away. All I could hear was the memory of that heavy, dragging step. Creak, drag, creak, drag. That wasn't a dream. That shadow wasn't my imagination. This was proof, cold, hard, terrifying proof. My first instinct was to call for my dad, to show someone, but I didn't. I was 8 years old. Who would believe me? They'd say it was a dream, or that I was making up stories. They'd say it was a deformed bear print, or that one of them had stepped there with their boot and left a weird mark. The shame of not being believed felt almost as scary as the print itself. So I did nothing. I just looked at it for a long time, memorizing every detail. The way the dust was pushed up around the edges, the deep impression at the heel, the clear, long shape of it. Then I turned around and went back inside, my heart back to that frantic, painful pounding. I never told anyone. Not my parents, not my grandpa, not my friends when I got back home. I carried that secret with me. A little nugget of pure fear buried deep in my chest. We went back to the cabin many times after that, but I never slept in that front room again. I always made up some excuse, said I was scared of the window and slept on the couch in the living room. I was always hyper-aware of the woods around that cabin after that. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the bushes made my breath catch. The woods weren't an adventure anymore. They were a place that held a secret, a place where something that wasn't supposed to exist had walked right up to my window and left its calling card. I'm an adult now, decades later. I've read stories, seen the blurry photos and the TV shows. I know what people call that thing, but I don't need a name for it. I just know what I saw, what I heard, and what I found the next morning. The memory is as sharp and clear as it was that day. The feeling of my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest, the dry-mouthed terror, the absolute certainty that I was looking at something I was never meant to see, and that single, long, wide footprint on my grandfather's clean porch, a mark that shouldn't have been there, a mark that confirmed the monster was real. I never saw it again, and I never found another print, but I didn't need to. Once was enough. It was more than enough. Story 6. It was one of those mornings where the air just felt different. I'd been camping solo for 3 days in Dinosaur National Monument, way out in the Colorado backcountry, and I was starting to get into that rhythm where the silence doesn't feel empty anymore. It just feels like the default state of things. My campsite was tucked in a small, sandy clearing by a dry wash, surrounded by these gnarled juniper trees and pinyon pines. It was peaceful. The kind of quiet that feels heavy and solid. That particular morning, I woke up with the sun. The light was just starting to hit the top of the cliffs to the east, turning them a soft, glowing pink. I made my coffee on the little camp stove. The hiss of the propane, the only real sound for miles. I remember thinking how clean everything smelled, like dust and pine sap and cold, dry air. I had no real plan for the day. My map showed a network of old game trails leading northeast from my camp, up toward a high ridgeline that looked like it had a pretty commanding view of the whole valley. I figured I'd just go for a walk, see how far I could get before the sun got too high. I packed a light day pack with some water, a protein bar, my camera, and a jacket, and just started walking. The first part of the hike was easy. The ground was soft under my boots, covered in a carpet of dry pine needles. I was following what was barely more than a deer path, weaving through the trees. I remember the way the light came through the branches, making these long, sharp shadows across the ground. It was beautiful. I felt good, alone, but not lonely. Just present. After about an hour of steady climbing, the trees started to thin out. The ground got rockier, more broken up. I was getting closer to the base of this big sandstone cliff face. The map called it something, but I can't remember the name now. It doesn't matter. It was just this huge rust-colored wall of rock, all cracked and weathered, with ledges and scrubby bushes growing out of the cracks. The game trail I was on sort of petered out, so I just started picking my own way up, heading for what looked like a decent vantage point along the cliff's edge. That's when I first heard the rocks. It wasn't a loud crash or anything. It was more like a clatter, a few small stones bouncing down the cliff face, pinging off the larger boulders below. I stopped and looked up, squinting against the morning sun. I didn't see anything. My first thought was, obviously, erosion. This whole place is constantly falling apart and rebuilding itself. Rocks fall all the time. It was a totally normal sound for that kind of terrain. I shrugged it off and kept climbing, my boots scraping on the loose scree. I heard it again maybe 10 minutes later, another little shower of gravel and pebbles. This one sounded like it came from further along the cliff edge to my left. I stopped again, my hand going up to shield my eyes. I scanned the rim. Nothing. Just the jagged line of rock against the bright blue sky. A slight breeze had picked up, rustling the leaves of the junipers. I remember feeling a tiny prickle of, not fear, but awareness. Like when you're in a big, empty house and you hear a floorboard creak upstairs. You know it's probably just the house settling, but your brain still flags it. That's what it was, a flag. I pushed the feeling down. I was being silly. I was out in the middle of nowhere, a grown man getting spooked by falling rocks. I decided to head toward where I'd heard the second lot of rocks come from. Maybe there was a cool overhang or a cave up there. I started moving more carefully, my footsteps lighter. The ground here was a mess of broken rock and dry, brittle manzanita bushes. Every step I took seemed too loud. The crunch of my boots on the gravel, the snap of a twig under my weight. The silence around me felt thicker now, like it was listening back. I finally reached a spot where I could see along the cliff edge properly. I was maybe 50, 60 feet below the rim, on a sort of sloping shelf. I leaned against a big, warm boulder to catch my breath and just looked. The view was incredible. I could see for miles across the canyons, all layered in shades of purple and brown and green. It was so vast, it almost didn't look real. And then I saw the movement. It was just a flicker in my peripheral vision at first. Up on the rim, maybe 100 yards to my left, something dark shifted against the light-colored rock. My head snapped toward it. There was a figure. It was low to the ground, scrambling along the very edge of the cliff. It wasn't walking upright. It was moving on all fours, but in a way that wasn't like a dog or a cat. It was, loping. Powerful. Its back was hunched, and it was covered in what looked like dark, matted hair, almost black or a very dark brown. The sun was behind me, so it was lit up clearly. I didn't get a look at its face. It was turned away from me, focused on moving along that precarious edge. My brain short-circuited. It tried to file it under bear. But it was all wrong. The proportions were wrong. The way it moved was wrong. Bears are big and bulky, but they don't have that sort of rangy, muscular build in the shoulders and arms. This thing had long arms, and it was fast. It scrambled over a jumble of fallen rocks with an ease that was unnerving. Then it must have seen me, or heard me, or somehow just sensed I was there. It stopped dead. Its whole body froze. I could see the shape of it more clearly now, silhouetted against the sky. The head seemed to swivel on a thick neck. I still couldn't see a face, but I felt its attention lock onto me. It was like a physical pressure in the air between us. For a second, nothing happened. We were just frozen. Me staring up at it, it staring down at me. The world had gone completely silent. No wind, no birds, nothing. Just the pounding of my own heart in my ears. Then it moved. It didn't stand up and roar. It didn't charge. It reacted with pure panicked speed. It let out this sound. It wasn't a growl, not a scream. It was a sharp, guttural huff, like a blast of air forced out of its lungs, and then it launched itself backwards, away from the edge, back into the thick cover of the juniper and pinyon trees that grew right up to the cliff line. The noise was what really got me. The sudden, violent noise of its retreat. It wasn't quiet. It crashed through the brush. I heard the snap of branches, the sound of its feet, or hands, I don't even know, scrabbling for purchase on the loose rock and dirt. It sounded heavy, really heavy. Rocks and dirt clattered down the cliff face where it had been standing just a second before. The whole thing lasted maybe 3 seconds, a burst of chaotic, terrified motion, and then it was gone. I stood there, pressed against the boulder, my body rigid. My mouth was hanging open. I couldn't process it. My mind was just a screaming mess of static. What was that? What the hell was that? The first clear thought that broke through was, that was not a person. It moved too fluidly on all fours. The shape was all wrong. It was bulkier through the shoulders and chest than any human, and the way it powered itself back into the trees was pure, raw animal strength. But it also wasn't a bear. I've seen black bears. This was different. The arms were too long, the way it scrambled. It used its hands. I saw that clearly. It wasn't just running on its legs. It was using its arms to pull itself along, to propel itself. It was ape-like. That's the only word that fit. It was like a huge, powerful ape. The terror didn't hit me all at once. It seeped in, cold and thick. It started in my gut, a hard knot of ice, and then spread out to my limbs, making my hands tremble. I was suddenly acutely aware of how exposed I was. I was standing on this open, rocky shelf with my back to a vast, empty canyon. The thing was in the trees just above me. I couldn't see it, but I knew it was there. I could feel it. I stayed frozen for what felt like an eternity, just listening. The normal forest sounds were still absent. It was that heavy, waiting silence. My eyes were glued to the spot where it had disappeared. The juniper branches were still quivering. Then I heard it, a soft rustle in the brush up above. Then another. It wasn't moving away. It was moving laterally, staying in the cover, paralleling the cliff edge. I could hear the soft crunch of its steps on the forest floor, the occasional snap of a twig. It was watching me. I was sure of it. It had been scared, sure, but its curiosity had gotten the better of it. It was staying hidden, but it was keeping track of me. That's when the full-blown primal fear took over. This wasn't just a startling encounter anymore. This was a predator-prey dynamic, and I had no idea which one I was. My breath started coming in short, sharp gasps. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might bruise them. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, to get the hell out of there, but I was terrified to move. I was afraid that any sound I made, any sudden motion would trigger it. Would it see me running as a sign of weakness, as prey, or would it just let me go? I had no frame of reference for this. This wasn't in any bear safety pamphlet. I slowly, So slowly it felt like my joints were creaking, slid down into a crouch behind the boulder. I made myself as small as possible. I pulled my day pack off my back, holding it tight against my chest like some pathetic shield. I just listened. The sounds in the brush continued, a slow, deliberate movement. It wasn't crashing around anymore. It was being cautious, stealthy. That was somehow 1,000 times worse. I could picture it up there, peering through the branches, its dark eyes fixed on my hiding spot. I started noticing details I hadn't before. The way the pine needles on the ground were stuck to the side of my boot, the gritty feel of the sandstone under my fingertips, the cold sweat trickling down my spine despite the cool morning air. My senses were dialed up to 11. I was hyper-aware of everything. I don't know how long I stayed like that. It could have been 5 minutes. It could have been 30. Time got all distorted. I just crouched there, listening to it move back and forth in the trees above me, my muscles screaming from the tension. I kept waiting for it to show itself again. I kept waiting for a roar or for it to come crashing down the slope toward me, but it never did. After a while, the sound stopped. Just stopped. The forest was silent again for a few minutes, and then, tentatively, a bird started chirping somewhere off to my right. The spell was broken. The normal world was cautiously reasserting itself. I didn't move for a long time after that. I waited, straining my ears, but I heard nothing more. No footsteps, no breaking branches, nothing. The thing was gone. When I finally convinced my legs to work, I didn't stand up. I stayed low and started backing away, crab-like down the slope, keeping my eyes glued to the tree line. I didn't turn my back on that cliff until I was a good couple 100 yards away, back down in the thicker trees. Then I stood up and I ran. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I just ran. I crashed through brush, my pack slamming against my back, my breath sawing in and out of my lungs. I didn't stop running until I burst back into my campsite, stumbling into the clearing and nearly falling over my own fire ring. I stood there in the middle of my camp, bent over with my hands on my knees, gasping for air. The familiar sight of my tent, my cooler, my folding chair, it all looked alien and fragile. The silence here wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt like a lie. I packed up my entire camp in a frantic, messy hurry. I didn't fold anything. I just shoved it all into the back of my truck. I was out of there within 20 minutes, driving way too fast down that bumpy dirt road, clouds of dust billowing up behind me. I kept checking my rearview mirror the whole drive out. I half expected to see a dark, upright shape watching me from the tree line as I left. I didn't see anything. I've turned that morning over and over in my head for months now. I've tried to rationalize it. A bear with mange? A person in a weird ghillie suit? But it doesn't fit. The way it moved, the speed, the raw power, the sheer size of it, and that sound it made, that sharp, panicked huff. I can still hear it. I was in Dinosaur National Monument alone, and I saw something on that cliff edge, something that shouldn't exist, something that saw me, was scared of me, and then decided to stick around and watch me. That's the part that haunts me the most. Not the initial sighting, but those long, silent minutes afterward, when I was crouched behind that rock, listening to it moving in the trees, knowing it was still there, and knowing, with a cold certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was completely and utterly out of my depth. I never got a clear look at its face. I don't know what it was. I just know what I saw and what I felt, and that I've never been more terrified in my entire life. And I have no explanation for any of it. Story 7. It was July of 1975, and I was 12 years old. My older sister, her husband, and their 2 girls, 5 and 7, had rented a cabin for a week at this place called Shady Elms Resort up in Wisconsin. My little brother, who was 10, and I were along for the trip. It was one of those family vacations that was supposed to be all about fishing and swimming and just getting away from the city. The resort was nice enough, a bunch of brown wooden cabins nestled near a lake, with these big old trees everywhere that gave the place its name. It felt peaceful, you know, the kind of place where you let your guard down. The day it happened was a Tuesday, I'm pretty sure. It was the middle of the afternoon, and it was hot. The air was thick and still, the kind of heat that makes the air over the asphalt shiver. We'd been down at the lake all morning, and after lunch the adults were all dozing off inside the cabin or sitting on the porch with their iced tea. Me, my brother, and my two nieces were bored and still buzzing with that restless kid energy. So we wandered over to this old swing set they had on the property. It wasn't right by the cabins. It was set in this little clearing, maybe 50 yards from our front door, but it backed right up against the woods, and I mean right up against them. The edge of the trees was a solid wall of green, maybe 20 feet from the base of the swing set. The woods were deep and dark, even in the middle of the day. You could look in there and just see shadows swallowing the light after a few yards. We didn't think much of it then. It was just woods. We were just messing around. I was pushing my nieces on the swings, and my brother was climbing on the metal frame, doing that thing kids do where they try to see how high they can get. The only sounds were the creak of the swing chains, the kids laughing, and the buzz of insects in the heat. It was so normal, so completely, boringly normal. Then, all at once, everything changed. It wasn't a sound that made us stop. There was no crack of a twig, no growl, no heavy breathing. That's the part that gets me even now. It was a silence, a sudden, heavy silence that fell over us. The laughter just died in our throats. The insects seemed to stop buzzing. It was like someone had thrown a blanket over the whole world, and we all turned our heads at the exact same time. I don't know why. There was no signal, no noise to turn toward. It was like a puppet master pulled all our strings at once. We just turned, as one, and looked at the tree line. It was standing there, 10 feet away. Just 10 feet from us, right where the grass met the shadows of the woods. It was just there. My brain short-circuited. It couldn't process what I was seeing. It was tall. So tall. 8 feet. Easy. Maybe more. It was built like, I don't even know, a gorilla, but standing up straight like a man. Its body was just solid, packed with muscles you could see even under all the hair. It wasn't shaggy, not like you see in some of the blurry photos. The hair was a medium brown color like wet bark, and it lay close to its body, almost sleek. It was powerful, that's the word. It looked powerful in a way that was scary just to see, like a bulldozer or a landslide, but its face is what I see when I close my eyes. It wasn't a gorilla's face. It was more like a chimp's, but bigger, flatter. The skin was dark, a leathery black, and its eyes, they were solid black. No white at all. Just two pools of absolute black, like obsidian. They didn't shine or reflect. They just seemed to absorb the light, and right above them its hair came down in this sharp point, a perfect widow's peak, framing that terrifying face. It was just standing there, perfectly still, one arm slightly out from its body. It wasn't looking at us, not at first. It was looking off into the woods, its head tilted a little, like it was listening to something we couldn't hear. We were frozen. I mean, completely paralyzed. My hand was still on my niece's back. Mid-push, my brother was clinging to the top of the swing set, his mouth hanging open. The girls on the swings had gone stiff. There was no screaming, no crying. It was like the fear had hit us with a physical force and nailed our feet to the ground. My heart wasn't just beating fast, it was slamming against my ribs, a frantic, painful hammering. I could feel the blood drain from my face, a cold rush that left my skin tingling. I remember the smell too. This sudden, sharp smell hit my nose. It was musky like a wet dog, but mixed with something else, something earthy and wild, like deep, damp soil and old leaves. It was the smell of the thing, and it was overwhelming. Time stretched out. It might have been 5 seconds, it might have been 30. We were trapped in this horrible silent tableau with this monster from a nightmare. Then it moved. It turned its head, not its whole body, just its head, slowly, smoothly over its left shoulder, and those solid black eyes landed right on me. They locked with mine. It wasn't a glance, it was a connection. I felt its gaze like a physical weight. It was intelligent. I know that sounds crazy, but in that moment, I knew it wasn't just some dumb animal. There was a presence behind those eyes, something that was looking back at me, seeing me, recognizing me as another living thing. And in that look, I didn't see anger, I didn't see hunger. I saw curiosity, a deep, ancient curiosity. But it was a predator's curiosity, and the sheer power radiating from its body made that look more terrifying than any snarl could have been. That broke the spell. A sound finally came out of me, a choked gasp that was half sob, half scream. It was like a starting pistol. We all erupted into motion at once. It was pure, blind panic. I remember grabbing my 5-year-old niece around the waist, yanking her off the swing so hard she yelped. I didn't even think. I just threw her over my shoulder like a sack of potatoes. My 7-year-old niece was already running, her little legs pumping, a high, thin wail coming from her. I didn't see my brother jump down from the swing set. I just saw a blur of his red t-shirt as he shot past me. We ran. We ran for the cabin, like the devil himself was on our heels. I didn't look back. I was too terrified to look back. My only thought was the cabin door. Get to the door. My heart was pounding in my ears, a deafening roar. My lungs burned. The little girl on my shoulder was screaming now, a full-throated, terrified scream, and the sound of it mixed with the pounding of our feet on the dry grass and my own ragged breaths. Halfway to the cabin, I risked a glance over my shoulder. I don't know why I did it, maybe to see how close it was. It was gone. The clearing by the swing set was empty. The thing had vanished back into the woods as silently as it had appeared. There was no movement, no sound. It was just gone. We didn't stop. We burst onto the porch, a tangle of crying, gasping kids. I slammed the screen door open so hard it banged against the side of the house. We fell into the living room, all of us collapsing on the floor, sobbing and trying to talk all at once. The adults were startled awake. My sister jumped up from the couch, her face confused and then alarmed. What in the world? What's wrong with you kids? We were all trying to explain, our words tumbling over each other. A monster, a big ape, in the woods. It looked at us. My brother was crying, his face pale and streaked with tears. It was huge. It had black eyes. My brother-in-law just sighed and shook his head. He walked over to the window and looked out toward the swing set. There's nothing there. You probably just saw a bear, a big black bear standing up. They can look scary if you're not used to them. It wasn't a bear, I insisted, my voice shaking so bad I could barely get the words out. I was still holding my niece, both of us trembling. It was walking on 2 legs. Its face was like a monkey. It was tall, taller than the door. They humored us for a little while, but you could see they didn't believe us. They thought we'd gotten ourselves worked up, that the heat and our imaginations had cooked up some story. My sister made us all some Kool-Aid and told us to calm down. They said we must have startled a bear, and it stood up. And in our panic, we made it into something else. That was the worst part, in a way. The dismissal, the absolute certainty from the adults that we were just silly, frightened children. The real, tangible terror we had felt was reduced to an overactive imagination. We knew what we saw. We all saw the same thing. We hadn't even had time to talk to each other about it before we ran, yet our descriptions matched perfectly. But it didn't matter. The rest of the vacation was ruined. We didn't go back to that swing set. We didn't go anywhere near the woods. We stayed on the porch or down by the crowded beach. And even then, I kept looking over my shoulder, my skin crawling, expecting to see it standing at the tree line, watching us with those black, absorbing eyes. The memory of it faded into a kind of weird, bad dream over the next year. We didn't talk about it much. What was the point? No one believed us. Then, about a year later, My brother came home from the library. He was 11 by then. He walked into my room without knocking, his face dead serious, and he put a book on my bed. It was one of those books about unexplained mysteries, with a grainy, dark picture on the cover. He pointed to a chapter heading, Bigfoot and Sasquatch, North America's Ape Man. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. I opened the book to the chapter, and there, in black and white, was a description. An 8 to 10 foot tall, bipedal ape-like creature, covered in brown or reddish-brown hair, a conical head, sometimes with a widow's peak, a face described as more ape-like than human. I looked up at my brother, and he just nodded, his eyes wide. He didn't have to say anything. We both knew. We hadn't seen a bear. We hadn't imagined it. We had seen exactly what was described in that book. That confirmation was almost as scary as the sighting itself. It meant it was real. This thing was out there, and it had been standing 10 feet away from us, just watching. I've thought about it 1,000 times since. What were its intentions? It didn't charge us. It didn't roar. It just stood there silent and massive, and then it looked right at me before it left. It approached without a sound, and it left without a sound. It was just checking on us, observing. The quietness of it was the most unnerving part. It had total control of the situation. It could have done anything, but it just watched, and then it was gone. I'm a grown woman now, with kids of my own. I've never gone camping since. I get nervous if I have to be in a wooded area for too long. That feeling of being watched, of not being at the top of the food chain, has never really left me. It was just one afternoon in July, a single terrifying day that lasted maybe a minute, but it rewired something in my brain. It showed me that the world is a lot bigger and a lot stranger than we think, and that there are things living in the quiet, dark places that we don't understand at all. And sometimes they come out to take a look at us. Story 8. I've never told anyone this, not my family, not my closest friends, and definitely not any park rangers or cops. I'm only writing it down now because it's been eating at me for years, and sometimes I feel like if I don't get it out of my head, it's just going to fester there forever. This happened in September of 2017. I was up in British Columbia, in the Selkirk Mountains, west of Revelstoke. It's remote up there, the kind of remote where you don't see another soul for days if you go deep enough, and that's exactly what I was aiming for. I'd planned a solo overnight trip to this unnamed lake I'd found on a topo map. No marked trails led to it, just a general route following a creek drainage. I liked that. I needed the silence, the kind you only get when you're truly alone. The morning started perfect. The sky was clear, a sharp, bright blue you only seem to get in the mountains in early fall. The air was cool, but the sun was warm on my jacket. I remember thinking it was going to be one of those flawless days. I was making good time, my pack felt good on my shoulders, and the forest was just peaceful. Tall hemlocks and cedars, the ground soft with decades of fallen needles. It was quiet, but a good quiet, the kind filled with little sounds, a squirrel chattering, the creek gurgling in the distance, the wind sighing way up high in the trees. That started to change in the early afternoon. I'd been hiking for a few hours, following this game trail that was supposed to lead me closer to the drainage. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It hit me in a wave, and I actually stopped dead in my tracks. It was a thick, heavy smell. Part of it was musky, like a wet dog that's been sleeping in a bog, but underneath that was this other smell, this coppery metallic tang, like old pennies and raw meat. It was so strong it made the back of my throat feel tight. I knew that smell. It's the smell of a kill. Something had died nearby, and recently my first thought was a bear. You're always thinking about bears out there, but this didn't feel right. A bear kill has a smell, sure, but this was more. It was overwhelming. I stood there for a minute, just breathing through my mouth, trying to decide what to do. My gut was telling me to turn around, to just get the hell out of there. But there was this other part of me, the curious part, the part that had gotten me into the backcountry in the first place, that wanted to see. I had to know what could make a smell that potent. So I pushed forward, moving slower now, every sense on high alert. The forest seemed to get quieter. The little sounds I'd been hearing just vanished. It was like someone had thrown a soundproof blanket over everything. The only noise was the soft crunch of my own boots on the ground and my own breathing, which was starting to sound way too loud. I followed my nose, and after maybe another 50 yards, I found the source. It was a deer, or what was left of one. It was a mess. It was lying in a small, trampled-down patch of ferns, and the ground around it was just torn up. Dark, wet earth was splattered everywhere. The deer itself was ripped apart. I'm not talking about a clean kill. This wasn't a wolf taking down a weak animal. This was violence, brutal, pure force. The ribcage was smashed open, guts were strewn around, and one of the hind legs was just gone, torn clean off at the hip. The head was still attached, its eyes wide and blank, and flies were already starting to buzz around it. The smell was so bad here I had to fight not to gag. I just stared at it, my mind racing. What could do this? A bear, a grizzly is powerful, sure, but this looked excessive. It looked angry. It looked like whatever did this wasn't just killing for food. It was destroying for the sake of it. I remember feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. This was wrong. This was all wrong, and that's when I heard it. From down the slope below me, maybe 30 or 40 feet away, hidden by a thick wall of salal and young firs, came a sound. A heavy, wet, tearing sound, like someone pulling apart a wet canvas sack full of meat. Then a low, guttural crunch. Something was still down there. Something was feeding. My blood went cold. I mean, I actually felt a physical chill wash over me from my scalp, right down to my heels. Every hair on my arm stood up. I froze, completely rigid. Don't move, don't breathe. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I was sure whatever was down there could hear it. Slowly, so slowly, my muscles ached with the effort. I crouched down. I was trying to make myself small. I peered through a gap in the salal leaves, down into the little hollow below, and I saw it. It was massive. I'm not good at judging height when I'm terrified, but it had to be over 8 feet tall. Easy. It was crouched over, its back to me, but I could see the sheer bulk of it. It was covered in dark hair, not fur, but long, shaggy hair, like a bison's, matted and dirty. Its shoulders were impossibly wide, rounded mounds of muscle. It had the other hind leg of the deer in its hands. Its hands, they weren't paws. They were huge, dark, and looked almost human, but thicker, with long fingers. It was using them to hold the leg while it ripped strips of meat off the bone with its mouth. That was the tearing sound. Then it shifted its weight, and I saw its profile. Its head was huge and blocky, sitting on a neck that was as thick as my thigh. It had a heavy brow ridge, and underneath, I caught a glimpse of a deep-set eye. But it was the jaw that stuck with me. It was massive, a powerful, brutal-looking thing, and it was covered in blood. Dark, wet blood was smeared all over its lower face and matted in the hair on its chest. I was watching a monster. That's the only word my brain could come up with in that moment. A real living monster. This wasn't a bear. This wasn't anything I'd ever seen in a book or on TV. This was something else, something that wasn't supposed to exist. I was so focused on its face, on the sheer primal wrongness of it, that I didn't realize it had stopped eating. It just froze. The leg hovered near its mouth, its head tilted ever so slightly, and then it sniffed the air, once, twice, a deep, wet, snuffling sound. It wasn't just smelling the deer or the forest. It was smelling for something else. It was smelling me. The terror that hit me then was a physical thing. It felt like a bucket of ice water had been dumped directly into my veins. My lungs seized up. I couldn't get air. This was it. It knew I was here. It moved its head, turning slowly, not towards me, but just scanning the area. I pressed myself lower into the ferns, praying I was hidden. My face was in the dirt, the smell of soil and decay filling my nose. I squeezed my eyes shut for a second, like a little kid thinking, if I can't see it, it can't see me. When I opened them again, it was rising. That was another thing that haunts me. The way it moved. It didn't heave itself up like a bear, all lumbering and clumsy. It rose fluidly, its legs straightening with a terrifying, powerful grace. It just unfolded until it was standing at its full, impossible height. It was even bigger than I'd thought. It towered over the young trees around it. The sun was behind it, casting this huge, long shadow that fell right over me. And I felt so small, so completely and utterly insignificant. It still had the deer leg in one hand. It lifted the mangled remains of the deer's torso with the other, like it was picking up a backpack. It didn't look at me. It didn't make a sound. It just turned and started to walk away, up the slope on the other side of the hollow. Its walk. God, its walk. It wasn't a walk. It was a stride. Each step was heavy and deliberate, and I could feel the impact through the ground. A deep, soft thump, thump, thump that vibrated up through the soles of my boots. It moved through the thick brush like it wasn't even there, just pushing through branches that should have stopped anything that size. It didn't run. It didn't hurry. It just walked away, this giant, dark shape, and within seconds it was gone, swallowed by the trees. The silence rushed back in. But it was a different silence now. It was heavy, oppressive. The normal forest sounds didn't return. It was just dead quiet. I don't know how long I stayed there, crouched in the ferns, trembling so hard my teeth were chattering. It could have been 10 seconds. It could have been 10 minutes. My mind was just a roaring static of pure fear. Finally, some basic survival instinct kicked in. Move. Get out. Now! I scrambled to my feet, my legs feeling like wet noodles. I didn't even look at the deer carcass again. I just turned and started half walking, half stumbling back the way I'd come. I wasn't thinking about my camp, about the lake, about anything. I just had to put distance between me and that thing. But almost immediately the feeling started, the feeling of being watched. It was so intense, it was like a physical pressure on the back of my neck. I kept whipping my head around, expecting to see it standing there, just watching me with those deep-set eyes. But there was nothing, just trees, always just trees. Then the sounds started. From deep in the forest, off to my left, came a loud thump. It wasn't a branch falling. It was a solid, heavy impact, like someone had slammed a giant sledgehammer into a tree trunk. It echoed through the quiet. I froze again, my heart in my throat. I stared into the shadows between the trees, seeing nothing. A few minutes later, as I was forcing myself to move again, another sound. This one was different. A sharp, loud crack, like a thick branch being snapped in two, not by accident, but with purpose. It came from my right this time, a little closer. It was playing with me. That's the only explanation that made any sense. It was herding me, or toying with me, letting me know it was still there, that it could see me even when I couldn't see it. The intelligence in that was almost more terrifying than its size. This wasn't just an animal. An animal would have either attacked or run away. This thing was smart. It knew what it was doing. The rest of the hike out was a blur of sheer, unadulterated panic. I wasn't hiking anymore. I was fleeing. I tripped over roots. Branches scraped my arms and face, but I didn't care. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of a tree sent a fresh jolt of terror through me. The knocking and cracking sounds followed me for what felt like miles, always staying just out of sight. always letting me know I wasn't alone. At one point, I crossed a patch of muddy ground near a seep. I almost ran right through it, but something made me stop. There, pressed deep into the black mud, was a footprint. It was huge, longer than my boot by a good 8 inches, and twice as wide. It had a clear arch and 5 toes. It was a foot, a giant, naked, human-like foot. Seeing it there, a real physical piece of evidence, made my stomach drop. This was real. I wasn't hallucinating. This thing was real, and it had walked right here. I finally made it back to my truck as the sun was dipping below the mountains, casting long, creepy shadows everywhere. I threw my pack in the back, fumbled the keys into the ignition, and peeled out of that gravel lot like the devil himself was on my bumper. I didn't stop driving until I was back on a main highway, surrounded by the lights of other cars. I never went to the cops. What would I have said? Hey, I saw Bigfoot in the woods? They'd have thought I was insane. Maybe I would have thought I was insane too, if it wasn't for the memory of that smell, the sight of that blood-smeared jaw, the feeling of those footsteps vibrating through the ground, and the image of that perfect, terrifying footprint in the mud. I still go hiking. I love the mountains too much to give them up, but I'm never alone anymore, and I'm always listening. That day in the Selkirks changed something in me. It peeled back a layer of the world I didn't know was there and showed me something raw and ancient and powerful. It showed me that we don't know everything, that there are still places where things can hide, and sometimes they're not just hiding. Sometimes they're watching. Story 9. It started around midnight. I was in the living room, curled up on the couch with a blanket, trying to focus on some dumb reality show to distract myself. The house was quiet, just the hum of the fridge and the wind outside. Buddy was out in the yard like he always is at night. He's got a doghouse and plenty of space to roam, and he usually barks if anything's off. But that night, he was silent, dead silent. I remember thinking it was weird, but I brushed it off. Maybe he was just tired or something. Then I heard it, a heavy thud on the porch, like someone dropping a sack of potatoes. At first I thought it was Buddy messing around, but Buddy's footsteps are lighter, more scrabbly. This was different. It was a slow, deliberate sound, like whatever it was had weight to it, a lot of weight. I paused the TV and listened. There it was again. Thump, thump, thump. It wasn't random. It had a rhythm, like it was pacing. My heart started beating faster, and I felt this cold knot form in my stomach. I told myself it was probably a deer or something. We get them out here sometimes, but deep down I knew it wasn't. Deer don't sound that heavy. I got up from the couch, my legs feeling wobbly, and tiptoed over to the window. The curtains were drawn, but there's a little gap between them where I can peek out. I remember my hands were shaking as I pulled the fabric aside just enough to see. The porch light was on, casting this yellow glow over the wooden boards, and at first I didn't see anything. Then something moved in the shadows near the edge, and my breath caught in my throat. It was huge, I mean massive, taller than any person I've ever seen and built like a refrigerator, but covered in dark, coarse hair that looked almost black in the light. It was standing there, just beyond the reach of the porch light, and its face, God. Its face was pressed right up against the window pane. I froze, completely paralyzed. Its eyes were deep set, sunk into this leathery, flat-nosed face, and they were fixed on me, not just looking in my direction, staring right at me, like it knew I was there. The skin around its eyes was wrinkled and rough, and I could see its breath fogging up the glass in little puffs. It didn't look angry or wild. It looked curious, intelligent, and that made it so much worse. I dropped the curtain and stumbled back, my heart hammering against my ribs. I could hear my own blood rushing in my ears. For a second, I just stood there, trying to process what I'd seen. This wasn't some animal. It was something else, something I'd only heard about in whispers or on those weird TV shows. But seeing it in person, it felt unreal, like a nightmare. But I was wide awake. The footsteps started again, heavier this time, moving along the porch. Thump, thump, thump. thump. It was circling the house. I could hear the wood creaking under its weight, and each step sent a vibration through the floorboards. I backed away from the window, my mind racing. What should I do? Call the police? But what would I say? There's a big hairy thing on my porch. They'd think I was crazy. My husband was at work and his shift wouldn't end for hours. I was completely alone. I decided to hide. The hallway between the living room and bedrooms seemed like the safest spot. It's narrow with no windows, and I could wedge myself between the wall and the coat rack. I crept over there, trying to move quietly, but every sound I made felt amplified. The floorboards groaned under my feet, and I was sure it could hear me. As I crouched down in the hallway, I could still hear it outside, moving around. It wasn't just walking, it was methodical, like it was inspecting the place. Then I heard the doorknob rattle. The front door has this old brass knob, and it jiggled, not violently, but like someone was testing it. My blood ran cold. I'd locked the door, of course, but what if it could get in? What if it was strong enough to break it down? I held my breath, listening. The rattling stopped, and the footsteps moved away, but then I heard it on the other side of the house, near the kitchen window. I risked a peek down the hall toward the living room. Through the gap in the curtains, I could see its shadow moving past the window. It was so big that it blocked out the light for a second as it passed. Then it stopped, and I saw its hand, massive, with thick fingers and dark hair, press against the glass. It wasn't a slap or a bang. It was a slow, deliberate press, like it was feeling the surface. The glass didn't break, but it left a smear of moisture behind, like from its palm. I could see the outline of it even from where I was hiding, and it made my skin crawl. The worst part was the feeling of being watched. Even though I couldn't see its eyes anymore, I felt this intense pressure, like it knew exactly where I was. It was studying the house, studying me. I've never felt so vulnerable in my life. This was my home, my safe place, and it felt like it was being invaded by something that didn't belong here, something that shouldn't exist. Time dragged on. I don't know how long I sat there, huddled in the hallway, but it felt like forever. I could hear it moving around the house, circling, always circling. Sometimes it would stop and I'd hear this low, rumbling sound, not quite a growl, more like a hum. It was deep and guttural, and it vibrated through the walls. I kept thinking about Buddy. Where was he? Why wasn't he barking? He's usually so protective, but there was nothing, just silence from outside. That scared me almost as much as the creature itself. What if it had hurt him? I remember my muscles aching from staying still for so long. My back was pressed against the wall, and my legs were cramping up. I had to pee, but I was too afraid to move. Every time I thought about making a run for the bathroom, I'd hear another footstep, and I'd freeze again. My mind kept racing through possibilities. Maybe it would get bored and leave. Maybe it was just passing through. But the way it was acting, it didn't feel random. It felt purposeful. At one point, it came back to the front window, and I saw its face again. This time it was closer, and I could see more details. The hair on its face was shorter, almost like stubble, and its eyes, they were dark, but there was a glint of something in them. Not malice, but curiosity. It was like it was trying to figure me out. I felt like a specimen under a microscope. I ducked my head down, praying it wouldn't see me, but I could feel its gaze through the walls. It was unnerving, like it had some kind of sixth sense. The footsteps continued round and round the house. I started counting them in my head, just to keep from losing it. Thump, thump, thump. It matched my heartbeat, and I felt like it was playing with me, like it knew I was hiding and was drawing out the fear. I thought about my husband, wondering if he was okay, if he'd come home early, but I knew he wouldn't. His shift didn't end until morning. I was on my own. Then, around 2 in the morning, something changed. The footsteps slowed, and I heard them move toward the edge of the porch. There was a final heavy thud, and then silence. I waited, holding my breath, listening for any sound. Nothing. No more footsteps, no rattling, no breathing, just the wind outside. I stayed put for what felt like another hour, too scared to move. What if it was a trick? What if it was waiting for me to come out? Eventually, I mustered up the courage to creep back to the living room window. I peered through the curtain, my hands trembling. The porch was empty. The smear on the glass was still there, a cloudy patch where its hand had been. I looked out into the yard, toward the woods that border our property. The trees were dark and thick, and I thought I saw a shadow moving between them, but it might have been my imagination. Then it was gone. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch with all the lights on, staring at the door, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. The creature was gone. The next few days were a blur. Buddy came back 2 days later, shaking and whimpering. He refused to go near the porch, and he'd hide under the bed whenever I tried to take him outside. It broke my heart. I called my husband, but he didn't believe me at first, thought I'd had a bad dream or something. But when he saw how scared I was and how Buddy was acting, he started to take it seriously. We checked around the house, and we found some footprints in the mud near the woods. They were huge, bigger than any bear tracks I've ever seen, and shaped almost human, but not quite. We took photos, but they came out blurry, and we never showed them to anyone. What would people say? I lived in fear for weeks after that. Every noise at night made me jump, and I'd check the windows over and over. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there, watching me, that intelligence in its eyes. It haunted me. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, thinking I saw its face in the window. My husband started working from home more, but it didn't help much. The terror was ingrained in me. The most terrifying moment, the one that still gives me chills, was when it pressed its palm against the window. In that split second, I realized it wasn't just some mindless beast. It was studying me, learning about me. I felt completely exposed, like it could see right through me, and that smear it left. I cleaned it off the next day, but I could still see it in my mind, a reminder of how vulnerable I was. To this day, I have no explanation for what happened. I've read stories online, accounts from other people who've seen similar things, and it helps to know I'm not alone. But it doesn't make the fear go away. Sometimes when I'm outside at night, I'll catch a whiff of something musky or hear a branch snap in the woods, and my heart will skip a beat. I'll never forget that night, and I'll always wonder what it was and why it chose my house. All I know is that I'm never going to feel truly safe again, not after that. Story 10. It was one of those scorching July days in South Carolina where the air feels like a wet blanket the second you step outside. The kind of heat that makes the asphalt on Browntown Road look like it's shimmering, like a mirage. The date was July 30th, 1990. I remember that part clear as day because it was my mother's birthday and we'd spent the afternoon at her place over in Bishopville. I was Bertha Blithers, 34 years old, and I had all 5 of my kids packed into our old Ford LTD station wagon. The car was a tank, but the air conditioning had given up the ghost about a week earlier. We were driving with all the windows down, which was the only way to survive. The wind was just hot air blasting through the car, but it was better than nothing. Tamasia, my 11-year-old, was in the front passenger seat with her arm hanging out the window, trying to catch the wind in her hand. Johnny, who was 13, was directly behind me. The 3 younger ones, Michael, Lucy, and baby Sarah, were in the very back, already dozing off, lulled by the heat and the hum of the tires on the road. It was getting on toward evening, but the sun was still stubbornly hanging in the sky, casting long, deep shadows through the pine trees that lined both sides of Browntown Road. It's a lonely stretch of road, not the kind of place you want to break down. Thick woods on either side, mostly pines with a tangle of underbrush, so dense you can't see more than 10 feet into it. We were about halfway between my mom's and our home, just past the old Miller farm, I think. The fields had given way to nothing but trees. I was tired. It had been a long day, and I was just focused on getting home, getting the kids fed, and into a cool bath. I had one hand on the wheel, the other arm resting on the open window frame. The radio was on, playing some old country song, but it was mostly static. I remember reaching over to fiddle with the dial, not really paying it any mind, when I saw something move in the trees to my right. It was just a flicker of motion in my peripheral vision. I turned my head to look, thinking it was probably a deer. We see them out here all the time. But this was different. It was bigger, and it was keeping pace with the car. My heart did a little stutter thump. We weren't going that fast, maybe 35, 40 miles an hour, but this thing, it was moving through the trees like it was nothing. It wasn't running like a deer, all graceful leaps. This was a powerful, heavy movement. I could hear it, even over the wind and the radio static, a sound of branches snapping. Not little twigs, but thick ones, like something big was just plowing through the undergrowth without a care in the world. "Mom?" Tomasia said, her voice a little nervous. She'd seen it too. She pulled her arm back inside the car. "It's just a deer, baby," I said. But my voice didn't sound right. It sounded tight. I pressed a little harder on the gas. The engine groaned, and we picked up speed, maybe hitting 45. But the thing in the trees kept up. It was staying right alongside us, hidden just in the shadows of the tree line. I could see glimpses of it. Dark brown, massive. The sheer size of it was what was making my hands start to sweat on the steering wheel. This was no deer, a bear maybe. We have black bears in South Carolina, but they don't get that big, and they don't move on two legs. Then it broke from the trees. It didn't step out. It didn't amble. It leaped. It came out of the woods in one huge, powerful bound, straight toward the passenger side of the car, the passenger side where Tomasia was sitting with her window wide open. Time didn't slow down. It just became a series of sharp, terrifying images burned into my brain. The creature was tall, at least 6 feet, but it was all bulk. It was covered in hair, dark brown hair that was matted and looked almost wet in places. It wasn't like a gorilla. It was leaner in a way, but so powerfully built. The arms were long, swinging as it ran, and the legs were thick like tree trunks. Its eyes, God, its eyes. They were big and dark, and they weren't animal eyes. There was something in them, something that looked, I don't know, aware. It wasn't just a beast charging. It was looking right at us, right at Tomasia. It was closing the distance between the tree line and the road in 2, maybe 3 strides. It was going to reach the car. Tomasia screamed. It wasn't a yell of surprise. It was a raw, primal sound of pure terror that tore right through me. I didn't think. I just reacted. I jerked the steering wheel to the left hard. The tires squealed and the whole car tilted, fishtailing on the asphalt. I remember the feeling of the car starting to slide, the loose gravel on the shoulder kicking up under the chassis with a sound like hail. I stomped on the gas pedal, flooring it. The old LTD's engine roared and we shot forward. My heart was hammering in my throat. I could feel it beating against my windpipe. I was gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles were white. I glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see it right behind us, but the road was empty. "Johnny, look back! Look back and see what it is!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "Johnny, God bless him!" He unbuckled his seatbelt and scrambled onto his knees in the back seat, peering out the rear window. The other kids were all crying now, woken by the swerve and the screaming. "It's there, Mom!" Johnny yelled, his voice high-pitched with fear. "It's on the road! It's standing up! It's walking!" "Walking how?" I screamed back, my eyes glued to the road in front of me, my foot still jammed on the accelerator. The speedometer was pushing 70, way too fast for that winding road. On 2 legs, it's just standing there in the middle of the road watching us. It's huge, Mom, it's just standing there. I risked a glance in the rearview mirror. I saw it, just for a second. A dark, tall, bipedal shape standing squarely in the center of Browntown Road, getting smaller as we sped away. It wasn't chasing us, it was just watching us leave. And then As I watched, it simply turned and walked, just stepped off the road and into the wall of trees on the other side. It didn't run, it didn't crash through the brush, it just melted into the shadows and was gone, vanished, like it had never been there at all. The silence in the car was heavier than the noise had been. The only sounds were the frantic whine of the engine, the rush of the wind, and the ragged, hitched sobs of my children. Tamasia was curled into a ball in her seat, her face buried in her knees, shaking. I could feel my own body trembling, a fine, uncontrollable shake that started in my hands and went all the way through to my core. My stomach was a hard, cold knot. I didn't slow down. I kept driving, my eyes flicking from the road to the rearview mirror, expecting to see those big, dark eyes staring back at me from the tree line. The woods on either side of us didn't feel like woods anymore. They felt like a curtain, and behind that curtain, something was waiting. We must have driven for another 10 minutes before I saw the first signs of other houses. I didn't feel safe until we were pulling into our own driveway, the familiar sight of our little white house with the peeling paint and the tire swing in the yard. I killed the engine and just sat there for a minute, listening to the tick, tick, tick of the cooling motor. My hands were still clamped on the wheel. I had to consciously tell my fingers to let go. I got everyone inside. The kids were shell-shocked, quiet. I sat them all on the couch and called the Lee County Sheriff's Office. My voice was still shaky when I told the dispatcher I needed to report something. I said we'd seen an animal, a big one, on Browntown Road, and that it had charged our car. Sheriff Trudale himself came out. He was a big man with a calm demeanor, and he sat at our kitchen table with a notepad. I told him everything, from the first movement in the trees, to it leaping at the car, to Johnny seeing it walk away on 2 legs. I described it as best I could. 6 feet tall, covered in dark brown hair, big eyes, walking upright. He listened, he wrote it down, and he asked Johnny to confirm what he saw. Johnny, pale and serious, nodded and said, "It was walking, sir, like a man but bigger, and it was fast." Sheriff Trudale was polite, but I could see it in his eyes, the skepticism. He said it was probably a bear, that sometimes they can stand on their hind legs, and the heat and the fear can play tricks on the mind. He filed the report, but he called it an unidentified animal incident. He told us to be careful driving out that way at dusk. After he left, I tried to get the kids to eat something, but no one was hungry. I put them all to bed in my room that night, every single one of them. I didn't want them out of my sight. I sat up in a chair by the window, looking out into our dark backyard, jumping at every little sound, a cricket, a rustle of leaves in the breeze. I couldn't get the image out of my head. That leap. The raw, powerful muscle, the way it moved through the trees like they weren't even there. And those eyes. They haunt me. They weren't the dumb, confused eyes of a startled animal. They were focused, intent. The thing that stays with me, the thing that keeps me up some nights even now, years later, is the simple, terrifying fact of what it did after. It didn't just run back into the woods. It didn't keep chasing us. It stood in the road. It watched us flee, and then it just turned and walked away, like it had made its point. We never drove down Browntown Road after dark again. We'd take the long way around, adding 20 minutes to the trip. I sold that Ford LTD a few months later. I couldn't stand to be in it anymore. Every time I got in, I'd smell that hot, dusty interior and feel that same panic start to rise in my chest. I never saw it again. None of us did. But I know what we saw that day, on July 30th, 1990. It was real. It was out there. And sometimes when the wind is just right and the woods get quiet, I wonder if it's still out there, watching from the shadows, remembering the car full of children it almost caught. Story 11. I was a deputy sheriff in Adams County, Idaho. It's a quiet place mostly. You get your usual stuff. Domestic disputes, kids partying where they shouldn't, the occasional drunk driver. You get a call for a traffic accident, you go. It's procedure. It's the job. This particular night, it was a Thursday. I remember because my shift was supposed to end at midnight and my wife had made a pot roast for dinner, and there were still leftovers in the fridge at home. I was looking forward to that. It was a clear night, cold for the season, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones, even with the patrol car's heater on full blast. The stars were out. A crazy amount of them you only see when you're miles from any real town. No moon to speak of, so aside from my headlights and the stars, it was just a deep, heavy blackness pressing in from all sides. The call came in just after 10:30. A single vehicle rollover, 10 miles north of Council on US Highway 95. Possible injuries. I was the closest unit. I hit the lights and siren and pushed the accelerator. My Ford Explorer had a good engine, and the road was empty. I was flying. The siren was a wail bouncing off the canyon walls, the red and blue lights painting the asphalt and the pine trees in frantic, rhythmic flashes. This stretch of 95, just north of Council, is nasty. It's all curves, cut right through a thick forest with these steep, rocky embankments dropping down to one side and rising up on the other. You don't drive it, you navigate it. My tires hummed on the pavement, and I was focused, both hands on the wheel, my eyes constantly scanning the road ahead, the edges, the mirrors. It's a habit. You're always looking for deer, especially at night. A deer can total a car, kill you, kill someone else. I was coming around one of those long, sweeping right-hand curves. My headlights carved a tunnel through the dark, illuminating the yellow center line, the gravel shoulder, the dense wall of trees on my left. On my right, the embankment was a steep, shadowy slope covered in scrub brush and pine, rising up maybe 30 or 40 feet to meet more forest. And then it happened. It wasn't a deer, it wasn't an elk, it wasn't a bear. I've seen all of those on this road more times than I can count. This was different. From the embankment on my right, something just emerged. It didn't step out. It didn't amble. It erupted from the shadows. 1 second there was nothing but darkness and dirt and pine needles. The next second this figure was just there, already in motion, already in the middle of my lane. My brain didn't even have time to process it as an animal. It was too big, too fast, and it moved all wrong. It was upright, fully upright, on 2 legs, like a man. But it wasn't a man. It was massive. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing had to be at least 1.5 feet taller, maybe more. It was covered head to toe in this shaggy, dark brown, almost black fur. It wasn't sleek like a bear's coat. It was stringy, thick like wet wool. It crossed the highway in 2, maybe 3 strides. The speed was unbelievable. It wasn't running like a man runs with that up and down motion. It was this powerful, fluid, loping gait. Its arms swung, but they were long, way too long, and its legs moved with a coordination that was just efficient, like it was built for this, for moving through this rough terrain with impossible speed. I didn't have time to brake. I didn't have time to swerve. I was going way too fast. My foot slammed the brake pedal out of pure instinct, but I knew it was useless. The anti-lock brakes shuddered, the tires screamed, and for a heart-stopping second, I was sure I was going to plow right into it. The front of my Explorer was aimed right at its torso. The thing didn't even look at me. Its head was forward, focused on the other side of the road. My headlights lit it up perfectly for that split second. I didn't see its face clearly. It was just a dark shape under the heavy brow, but I saw the sheer bulk of it, the width of the shoulders, the power in its thighs as it pushed off the asphalt. It was real, it was solid, it had weight. I could feel its presence, a physical pressure in the air, and then it was gone. In one final, powerful leap, it hit the opposite embankment and scrambled up. I'm not talking about climbing. It just went up, using its long arms to pull itself, its legs driving it forward, and it vanished into the wall of trees. The whole thing, from the moment I saw it to the moment it disappeared, lasted maybe 3 seconds, 4 at the most. My car skidded to a stop, angled slightly across the empty northbound lane. The siren was still wailing, a stupid, meaningless sound now. The only other sound was the frantic thumping of my heart in my ears and my own ragged breathing fogging the inside of the windshield. I just sat there, my hands locked on the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I could smell the burnt rubber from my tires. I stared at the spot where it had disappeared. Nothing. Just dark trees and deeper shadows. My mind was a scrambled mess. What the hell was that? It wasn't a question. It was a scream inside my head. What the hell was that? My training kicked in, or some hollow echo of it. I put the car in park. My hand went for the radio mic, my fingers trembling so bad I could barely press the button. I opened my mouth to call it in. Dispatch, be advised. I've just seen what? A monster? A giant, hairy man? They'd think I'd lost it. They'd pull me from duty. I'd be a laughing stock. I let go of the button. I couldn't do it. I sat there for what felt like 10 minutes, just staring into the woods, waiting for it to come back out, waiting for some other sign. Nothing moved. The forest was silent, eerily silent. No crickets, no owls, nothing. It was like every living thing in a half-mile radius had just shut up and hidden. The accident. I had to get to the accident. The thought cut through the panic. People might be hurt. That was my job. That was real. I took a deep, shaky breath, put the car in drive, and pulled back onto the road. I didn't turn the siren back on. The sudden quiet was deafening. I drove the rest of the way to the accident scene, my eyes constantly darting to the rear-view mirror, to the sides of the road, expecting to see it again, following me. My whole body was tense, buzzing with adrenaline. I could still see it, that image burned onto my retinas. The dark fur, the impossible height, the way it moved. The accident scene was a mess. A pickup truck had missed a curve and rolled into a ditch. The driver was shaken up, but okay. I did my job. I directed traffic. I talked to the tow truck driver. I filed my report. But I was on autopilot. My mind was back on that curve. Every time a branch cracked in the woods nearby, I flinched. The normal night sounds of the forest now felt threatening. While I was waiting for the tow truck standing by my cruiser, the smell hit me. It was faint, carried on a slight breeze from down the road, from the direction I'd come. It was a smell I'd encountered before in this general area, but I'd never connected the dots until now. It was a powerful, awful stench, like rotting meat mixed with something else, something musky and wild, like a wet dog but 1,000 times stronger. I'd smelled it on other nights, usually after a heavy rain, and written it off as a dead animal somewhere in the woods. But now it felt like a signature, a calling card, and the boulders. I remembered another thing. A few times after particularly heavy rainstorms, we'd get calls about large rocks or small boulders in the road on this same stretch. Not little gravel, but big, heavy stones that would have taken a few strong men to move. We'd always figured it was just washouts from the embankments, the rain loosening the soil. It made sense, but now, thinking about the sheer size and strength of the thing I'd seen, pushing a big rock onto a road wouldn't be hard for it. It wouldn't be hard at all. The rest of my shift was a blur. I finished up at the accident, drove back to the station, wrote up the bare minimum for the rollover report. I didn't write a single word about what I'd seen. What would I have said? I clocked out, got in my personal truck and drove home. The whole way I kept my high beams on, my eyes straining at every shadow. I walked into my house, and my wife was asleep on the couch, the TV on low. The smell of pot roast was still in the air, a normal, comforting smell. I stood there in the living room, looking at her, at our home, and it all felt alien. The world wasn't what I thought it was. There was something out there in those woods, something that shouldn't exist, something big and fast and powerful that could cross a highway in seconds right in front of a speeding police car. I never reported it, not officially. I told my wife the next morning I'd had a close call with a big elk, that it had shaken me up, She believed me, but every time I had to drive that stretch of 95 at night, my heart would start pounding. I'd slow down before that curve. I'd scan the embankments, my high beams cutting through the dark, looking for movement, for a massive, hairy shape. I never saw it again. I quit the force a couple years later, moved my family down to Boise for a different job, but I still think about it. I still have dreams about it. Not nightmares exactly, but just replays. That feeling of utter helplessness as this thing, this creature, moved with a purpose I couldn't understand, right in front of me, and then was gone. I was a deputy sheriff. I had a badge, a gun, a radio. I was supposed to be in control. But in that moment, I was nothing. Just a guy in a metal box, watching something impossible happen, and all I could do was watch. And the worst part, the thing that keeps me up sometimes, is the not knowing. What was it? Where did it go? And what if I hadn't been in a car? What if I'd been on foot? I don't know, I just don't know. Story 12. It was around midnight, and I got a call about a car that had hit an elk on one of the back roads just outside town. The dispatch said it was a mess. The car was totaled, and the elk was dead in the middle of the road. Normally, I'd just hook it up, maybe help with cleanup if the wildlife folks weren't around. But it was snowing pretty hard that night, and the roads were a sheet of ice. I remember pulling on my heavy coat and gloves, thinking it was just another cold, miserable job. The kind where you're just counting the minutes until you're back in the warm cab of your truck. The drive out there was slow because of the snow. It was coming down in big, wet flakes, and the wind was howling something fierce. My headlights cut through the darkness, but everything beyond that was just black, with the snow swirling in the beams. I had the heater on full blast, but I could still feel the cold seeping in through the windows. My hands were clenched on the steering wheel, and I kept having to wipe the fog off the inside of the windshield with my sleeve. It was one of those nights where you feel alone in the world, like you're the only person for miles. And in that part of Montana, you pretty much are. When I got to the spot, I saw the car first. A beat-up sedan that had skidded off to the side, its front end smashed in. The driver was already gone, probably picked up by someone else or taken to the hospital. But the elk was still there, lying in the road. It was a big bull with a massive set of antlers, and it was just dead. Blood was pooling around it, dark against the white snow. And the smell hit me as soon as I stepped out of my truck. That coppery, earthy scent mixed with the cold air. I remember shivering, not just from the cold, but from the stillness of it all. The snow was muffling everything, so it was almost silent, except for the wind whistling through the trees. I started setting up my gear, getting the winch ready to pull the elk off the road so I could clear the scene. My boots crunched in the snow, and I could feel the wetness seeping through my pants. I was focused on what I was doing, trying to hurry because I wanted to get out of there. That's when I heard it. A deep, guttural grunt that came from the trees off to my left. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard before. Not a bear, not a moose, nothing. It was low and rumbling, like something huge was clearing its throat, and it sent a chill straight down my spine. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest, and I slowly turned my head toward the sound. That's when I saw it. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me because of the snow and the dark, but then it moved. It was this massive, hairy thing, standing maybe 8 feet tall, and it was dragging the elk by its antlers with one hand. Just one hand, like the elk weighed nothing. The elk must have been 600 or 700 pounds, but this thing was pulling it like it was a toy. Its body was built like a bodybuilder's, thick, muscular arms and shoulders, covered in brown and graying hair that was matted and wet from the snow. It had long hair on its head, almost like a mane, and a beard that hung down to its chest. But the eyes, they were what got me. They were whitish and reflective, like a deer's eyes in headlights, but bigger, and they seemed to glow in the dark. It looked right at me, Not a quick glance, but a steady, calm stare that lasted a couple of seconds. I felt paralyzed, like I couldn't move or breathe. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was it a bear? No, bears don't stand that tall or have that kind of build, and they don't drag elk around like that. This thing was upright, walking on two legs, and it moved with a slow, deliberate pace like it wasn't in any hurry. It didn't seem scared of me at all. It just kept pulling the elk, its massive hand wrapped around the antlers and the snow crunching under its feet. I could hear the sound of the elk's body scraping through the snow, and the grunt came again, deeper this time, like it was annoyed or something. I don't know how long I stood there, probably only 15 seconds or so, but it felt like an eternity. Every detail is burned into my brain. The way the hair on its arms was clumped with snow, the way its breath fogged in the air, the sheer size of it. It was so close, maybe 30 feet away, and I could smell this musky animal odor mixed with the scent of pine and blood. My body was trembling, and I felt this cold sweat break out on my forehead, even though the air was freezing. I think I was holding my breath, afraid that if I made a sound it would come for me. Then it just turned away and kept dragging the elk into a ditch on the side of the road. It didn't run or hurry, it moved like it owned the place, like I was nothing to worry about. Once it was out of sight, I finally let out a gasp and stumbled back toward my truck. My legs felt like jelly, and I had to lean against the door to keep from falling. I fumbled for my radio, my hands shaking so bad I could barely press the button. I called it in to the state trooper who was supposed to be en route, my voice cracking as I tried to explain what I'd seen. When the trooper showed up, he was this older guy, looked tired and skeptical. I told him everything, stumbling over my words, and he just listened with this blank expression. When I finished, he shook his head and said something like, "Son, it was probably a bear. You know how the snow can play tricks on your eyes." But I insisted. I told him about the height, the build, the way it dragged the elk with one hand. He shrugged and said he'd file a report, but I could tell he didn't believe me. He helped me clear the scene, and we loaded what was left of the elk into my truck, but the whole time I felt this unease, like I was being watched. I kept glancing toward the trees, half expecting to see those whitish eyes again. After we were done, I drove back to town, but I couldn't shake the feeling. My hands were still trembling on the wheel, and every shadow in the trees made me jump. I kept replaying it in my head, the grunt, the sight of it, the way it looked at me. It wasn't just fear, it was awe too. I've seen a lot of things out in the wild, but nothing like that. Nothing that made me feel so small and insignificant. I got back to my place around 2 in the morning, but I didn't sleep. I just sat in my living room, staring out the window at the snow, thinking about what happened. The next day, I tried to go about my business, but it was always there, in the back of my mind. I even thought about going back to the spot, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. What if it was still there? What if it wasn't alone? To this day, I don't know what it was. People talk about Bigfoot or Sasquatch, but I never put much stock in that stuff. Now I'm not so sure. All I know is that I saw something that night, something powerful and real, and it left me with this deep, lingering fear. Sometimes when I'm out on a call late at night, I'll hear a noise or see a shadow, and my heart will start racing all over again. I guess I'll never have an explanation, and that's the part that haunts me the most. Story 13. All right, I'm just going to type this out. I've been sitting on it for a while, and I guess writing it down might help. Or maybe it'll just freak me out all over again. I don't know. But I need to get it out there. My name is Shannon Morgan. This happened at Mono Lake in California. It was a Tuesday, I remember, because my dad had taken a couple days off work. He's a landscape photographer, been doing it for decades, and he's been trying to get me into it. I'm in my late 20s, and honestly, it's been a good way for us to connect. He's always been a quiet guy, and so have I. So driving out to the middle of nowhere before the sun comes up is our version of a heart-to-heart. We left the house when it was still full dark, maybe around 4 in the morning. The drive was quiet, just the hum of the car and the GPS telling us where to go. We got to the lake around 6. It was that time they call the golden hour, when the light is all soft and orange and everything looks like it's glowing. The air was cold, the kind that bites at your ears and makes you wish you'd worn a thicker beanie. I remember pulling my jacket tighter and my breath making little clouds in front of my face. We parked in this little gravel lot. There was one other car there, which wasn't unusual. My dad was already getting his gear out, talking in a low voice about the light. How perfect it was, how the Tufa towers were gonna look like skeletons coming out of the water. I was just trying to wake up, my hands shoved deep in my pockets, my camera bag heavy on my shoulder. There's a path from the lot down to the shoreline. It's not a paved trail or anything, just a worn-down track in the dirt and scrub brush. It winds a little, with these gnarly, low trees on either side. They're not big, dense woods, more like sparse, twisted things that look 100 years old. You can see between them pretty easily in most places. We started walking down the path. I was a few steps behind my dad, just following his footsteps. The gravel crunched under our boots. It was so quiet. I mean, properly quiet. No birds, no wind, just this immense, heavy silence that you only get in places like that. The sun was just starting to hit the tops of the distant hills, casting long, deep shadows across the ground. We'd probably been walking for a minute, maybe 2, when I saw it. My eyes were just kind of scanning the trees to our left. I wasn't looking for anything, just taking in the scenery, and then something moved. It wasn't a flicker or a blur. It was a solid black shape, moving upright between the trees. It was about 15 yards away, moving parallel to us, keeping pace. I stopped dead. My feet just froze to the ground. My brain tried to file it away as a person, a hiker maybe, dressed in dark clothes, but it was all wrong. It was covered in this dark hair, not like a fur coat, but like it was hair, thick, dark, matted-looking hair. It had no shape of clothing, no backpack, no hat, no gear of any kind. It was just this tall, dark, hairy form, walking on 2 legs, and it moved so smoothly. It wasn't loping or shuffling. It was a fluid, powerful walk, like it was gliding. Its arms swung naturally at its sides. It was tall, way taller than a man. I'm 5'8", and this thing had to be at least 7 feet, maybe more. It was hard to judge with the trees in the way, but it made the scrub brush look small. It took 2, maybe 3 steps, and then it just ducked behind a wider tree trunk. It didn't crouch down like a person trying to hide. It just shifted its weight and was gone behind the tree, and there was no sound, no crack of a twig, no rustle of leaves, nothing. It had moved through that dry brush without making a single noise. My heart was suddenly hammering in my throat. I could feel it pounding against my windpipe. I couldn't breathe. "Dad," I whispered. It came out as a croak. He was a few feet ahead and turned around. "You okay, Shan?" I just pointed, my hand shaking. There was something between the trees. He squinted, looking where I was pointing. The area was empty now, just still trees and shadows. He looked back at me, and his expression changed from curiosity to concern. He saw the pure fear on my face. "I saw movement," he said, his voice low and serious. "I didn't get a good look, just a shift in the shadows. I thought it was a deer." "It wasn't a deer," I said, my voice a little stronger but still tight. "It was walking, on 2 legs. It was covered in hair." He stared at me for a second, then looked back into the trees. He's a practical man, an engineer by trade. He looks for logical explanations. "Probably just a shadow, honey. The light is playing tricks, or a bear. They can stand up sometimes." "It wasn't a bear," I insisted. I felt a weird mix of terror and frustration. I knew what I saw. I knew the difference between the shape of a bear and the shape of a man. This was neither. It was something else. It walked like a person, and then it went behind that tree and just vanished. He patted my shoulder. "Okay, let's just keep going to the water. We're almost there." I didn't want to move. Every cell in my body was screaming at me to turn around and run back to the car, but my dad was already walking again. So I forced my legs to work, my eyes glued to the spot where it had disappeared. I felt like if I looked away, it would reappear somewhere else closer. The rest of the walk to the shoreline was the longest 2 minutes of my life. I was hyper-aware of everything, the way the cold air felt on my skin, the individual pebbles under my feet, the absolute silence that now felt threatening, like the whole landscape was holding its breath. I kept my head on a swivel, looking left, right, behind us. My neck was getting stiff with tension. When we got to the shore, the view was breathtaking. The lake was like a sheet of pink glass, the tufa towers rising out of it like something from another planet. The sun was hitting them now, turning them a brilliant gold. Under any other circumstances, I would have been in awe. There was a man there already, a photographer with a huge tripod set up. He nodded at us as we approached. My dad, ever the social one, struck up a conversation. "Getting some good shots?" he asked. "Yeah, light's perfect," the guy said. He seemed normal, relaxed. "You the other car in the lot?" my dad asked. "Yep, that's me," the guy said. And that's when the bottom dropped out of my stomach. I looked at my dad, and I saw the same realization dawn on his face. His easygoing expression tightened. He just gave the guy a small nod and turned away, busying himself with his camera bag. That other car was his, which meant the thing I saw in the trees. It wasn't him. It wasn't another hiker, another photographer. There was no one else out here with us. My dad came over to me, pretending to adjust a lens. He spoke under his breath. "Okay, so it wasn't him." I just nodded, my mouth dry. The logical excuse was gone. It was just us and whatever that was. My dad tried to brush it off again. "Must have been an animal, Shannon. A big one, a shadow. Our minds can see strange things in the half-light." But he was saying it to comfort himself as much as me. I could hear the doubt in his voice now. We started taking photos, or my dad did. I held my camera, I pointed it at the lake, but I wasn't seeing the composition or the light. I was just looking past my viewfinder, back toward the tree line. My hands were so cold and shaky, I could barely press the shutter button. Every few seconds, my eyes would dart back to that spot. I couldn't focus. I couldn't get the image out of my head. The way it moved, that smooth, silent, powerful gait, the sheer size of it, the way it disappeared without a sound. That's what got me the most, I think. The silence. A human makes noise. A deer makes noise. A bear definitely makes noise. This thing moved through dry, brittle undergrowth, like it was nothing, like it was part of the landscape itself. The terror wasn't a sudden jump scare feeling. It was a slow, creeping cold that started in my gut and spread outwards until my whole body felt numb with it. It was the realization of how easily something could be out there, watching us, and we would never know. The brush wasn't that thick. You could see 20, 30 yards in most places, but it was enough. There were enough little dips in the land, enough clusters of trees. It could be 10 feet away and we might not see it until it was too late. I felt a primal, deep-seated feeling that we were not alone, that we were being watched. It was a physical sensation, a prickling on the back of my neck, a feeling of pressure between my shoulder blades. I kept wanting to spin around, convinced I would see it standing right behind me. My dad must have felt it too, because he stopped talking about the photos. He just worked in silence, his movements brisk and efficient. He'd glance up at the tree line every now and then, his jaw tight. We stayed for about an hour. It felt like 10 years. The whole time, I was listening so hard my ears started to ring, trying to pick up any sound that wasn't us or the other photographer. But there was nothing, just that immense, waiting silence. The urge to go off the path, to go and look behind that tree, was surprisingly strong. It was a stupid, reckless urge, the kind your gut screams at you to ignore. My gut was screaming. It was a solid, visceral feeling telling me to stay on the damn path, to not go into the brush, to not investigate. It felt like a basic rule of survival had been activated. Don't go looking for the thing that hides too well. Finally, my dad said, "I think I got what I need. You ready to head back?" I'd never been more ready for anything in my life. I just nodded, not trusting my voice. The walk back to the car was worse. Now we were heading back toward the area where I'd seen it. My heart was back to pounding in my throat. I walked right behind my dad, so close I was almost stepping on his heels. I didn't care. I kept my eyes scanning the trees, left, right, until I felt dizzy. Every shadow looked like it could coalesce into a solid form. Every tree trunk seemed like it could be hiding something just behind it. My imagination was painting pictures I didn't want to see. I kept expecting to see a pair of dark, intelligent eyes staring back at me from the gloom. We passed the spot. I looked at the tree it had ducked behind. There was nothing there. No sign, no footprint, no broken branch. Nothing. We got to the car. My dad fumbled with the keys for a second before unlocking the doors. We threw our gear in the back and got in, slamming the doors shut. The sound of the locks clicking into place was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. He started the car, and we just sat there for a minute, not saying anything. We were both breathing a little heavily, like we'd been running. He looked over at me, his face pale. "You really saw something, didn't you?" he said quietly. I just nodded, staring out the windshield at the tree line. The morning sun was fully up now, bathing everything in a bright, cheerful light. It didn't feel cheerful. It felt like a mask. It didn't move like an animal, I finally said, my voice hoarse. And it was completely silent. He put the car in reverse and backed out of the spot. We drove away in silence. We didn't talk about it again for the rest of the day. We just drove home. And the whole way, I kept looking in the side mirror, half expecting to see a tall, dark figure standing in the middle of the road, watching us leave. The experience left me shaken for days. That sense of unease of having been in the presence of something I can't explain has never really gone away. It's a lingering feeling, like a stain on my memory. I can't look at a dense patch of woods the same way anymore. I think about how easy it is to hide in a landscape, how much we don't see, and it sends a chill right through me. I was just there to take some pictures with my dad. I never expected to come face to face with something that shouldn't exist, something that looked right at me before it vanished into thin air without a sound, and I still can't explain what it was. Story 14. It was one of those perfect late September days, the kind Ohio gets right before the gray of winter sets in for good. The air was cool, but the sun was warm on your skin, and the leaves were just starting to turn. My friend and I had decided to spend the whole Saturday out at the Rocky River Reservation. We're both pretty serious about fishing, the quiet kind, where you don't talk much and just enjoy being out there. We got there around 8 in the morning, the mist still clinging to the water in patches. We parked at one of the lots off the parkway and hiked a good ways down, past where most of the casual walkers go, to this spot we'd scouted a few weeks back. It's a bend in the river where the water slows down and deepens, perfect for smallmouth bass. The river isn't huge there, maybe 20 feet across if you're stretching it. You can see clearly to the other side, which is just a steep, wooded bank climbing up into the thicker parts of the reservation. We set up our gear on our side, which was a little flatter, a small gravelly area with a few bigger rocks to sit on. The sound of the river was the only thing, that constant, gentle rush that just washes everything else out of your head. We'd been there for a couple of hours, casting, reeling in, not catching much of anything, but it didn't matter, that was the whole point. It was probably a little after 10 when the deer showed up. A whole herd of them, maybe 7 or 8, started crossing the river about 50 yards downstream from us. It was beautiful. They were so graceful, picking their way through the current, their legs looking so delicate. We both stopped fishing to watch them. They climbed out on the opposite bank, shook themselves off and disappeared silently into the woods. The forest just swallowed them up. That's when I saw the other movement. My eyes were still fixed on the spot where the last deer had vanished. At first, I thought it was a straggler, maybe one that had been hesitant to cross, but the shape was wrong. It was higher up. A deer's head, when it's browsing, is down. This thing, its upper body was upright, and it was reaching up into the lower branches of a big sycamore tree. It was just a dark shape, silhouetted against the slightly lighter gloom of the woods behind it. I nudged my friend with my elbow and pointed with my chin, not saying anything. She followed my gaze. We both just watched. It didn't move like any animal I've ever seen. It wasn't a bear. I've seen black bears in Pennsylvania, and they have a certain lumbering shuffle, even on two legs. This was different. It was smoother, more deliberate. It pulled its arm down from the tree, and I saw then that it was standing fully on two legs. My brain was trying to file it away, to find a box to put it in. A guy in a big coat, a weird stump, but stumps don't move. Then it took a step forward, out from the deeper shadow of the trees and into a patch of sunlight that was filtering down through the canopy. That's when the sunlight hit its face, and its eyes glowed. It wasn't a reflection like a cat's eyes, sharp and glassy. This was different. They were a deep, reddish-orange color, like hot coals, and they were locked directly on me. I felt that stare like a physical touch, a cold pressure right in the center of my chest. My breath just stopped in my throat. It took another step, fully into view now at the water's edge, and I could see it clearly. It was big, really big. Well over 6 feet tall, I'd say, closer to 7. It was covered in hair or fur that was a shaggy, matted black. It wasn't like a bear's fur, which can look almost tidy. This looked thick and wild, like it had been through brambles and mud. Its shoulders were massively broad, way broader than any man's, and its arms were long, hanging down past its knees. They just hung there at its sides, relaxed but powerful looking, with these big, heavy hands. It didn't make a sound. The river was still gurgling, birds were still chirping somewhere, but this thing was utterly silent. It just stood there, motionless, on the other side of this narrow strip of water, and it stared at us. No, it stared at me. Its head was slightly tilted, and those red-orange eyes were fixed on my face. I could see its chest moving slowly, breathing. I remember the way the sunlight caught the texture of the fur on its chest, highlighting the different lengths, the way it was clumped in places. I was frozen, completely and utterly frozen. It wasn't just fear, though that was a huge part of it. It was disbelief. My mind was screaming that this was impossible, that things like this don't exist, that I was seeing things, but I wasn't. It was right there, 20 feet away. I could have thrown a rock and hit it. The spell broke because of my friend. I heard a sharp, strangled gasp next to me. I didn't turn to look at her. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the creature, but out of the corner of my eye, I saw her movements. They were frantic. She dropped her fishing rod on the gravel with a clatter. She didn't say a word. She didn't yell, "Run," or "What is that?" She just scrambled for her small tackle box, snatched it up, and then she was gone. I heard the crunch of her footsteps, fast and panicked, receding up the path behind me. I was alone. The moment she left, the creature's gaze seemed to intensify. It was just me and it now. I felt a fresh wave of cold terror wash over me, so strong it made me feel nauseous. The shock that had been holding me in place finally wore off, replaced by a primal, screaming instinct to get away. I moved without thinking. I dropped my own rod. It was a nice rod too, but in that moment it was just a piece of junk. I lunged for my tackle box, a big, heavy plastic one. My fingers fumbled, slick with sweat, and I almost dropped it. I finally got a grip, clutching it to my chest like a life preserver. I took one last look across the river. It was still there, still watching. It hadn't moved an inch. Its expression was unreadable, but its attention was absolute. It was studying me, I turned and ran. I sprinted away from the riverbank, across the small field that separated the fishing spot from the wooded trail, back to the car. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would burst. My lungs were burning, but I couldn't seem to get enough air. The tackle box was banging against my leg, a painful, rhythmic thud that I barely registered. The field seemed so much bigger than it had on the way in. Every step felt like I was running through mud. I was terrified to look back. I just focused on the tree line ahead, the entrance to the path. I kept expecting to hear something behind me, a splash as it crossed the river, the sound of heavy footsteps, a roar, but there was nothing. Just the sound of my own ragged breathing and my feet pounding on the ground. Then I tripped. My toe caught on a hidden root or a dip in the ground, and I went down hard. I landed on my chest, the tackle box flying out of my hands and skittering away. The impact knocked the wind out of me. For a second, I just lay there, stunned, my face in the damp grass, gasping, and that's when the fear became absolute, pure panic. Being on the ground, vulnerable, was the worst feeling I have ever experienced in my life. My mind was screaming that it was right behind me, that it was reaching for me. I scrambled up, my hands and knees scraping on the dirt and gravel. I didn't even look for the tackle box, I just left it. I got to my feet and ran again, this time even faster, a blind, desperate sprint. I burst onto the trail and didn't slow down. Branches whipped at my arms and face. I didn't care. All I could think about was the car, the parking lot, safety. I finally saw the break in the trees ahead, the gleam of asphalt. I pushed myself even harder, my legs feeling like jelly. I exploded out of the woods and into the parking lot. Our car was the only one there, and my friend was already in the passenger seat. I could see her through the windshield, and even from a distance, I could tell she was as white as a sheet. I fumbled for my keys in my pocket, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get a grip on them. I hit the unlock button and yanked the driver's side door open, practically falling into the seat. I slammed the door shut and immediately hit the lock button. The solid thunk of the locks was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. I looked over at my friend. She was staring straight ahead, through the windshield. Her hands clenched into fists in her lap. She was trembling all over. Her knuckles were white. "Start the car," she whispered. Her voice was tight, strained. "Just start the car." I shoved the key into the ignition and turned it. The engine roared to life. I slammed the gear shift into reverse and backed out so fast the tires squealed. Then I threw it into drive and stomped on the gas. Gravel sprayed behind us as we shot out of the parking lot and onto the parkway. We drove in silence for a few minutes, both of us just breathing heavily. I was gripping the steering wheel so tight my arms ached. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a massive, dark figure loping out of the woods after us. But there was nothing, just an empty road. I finally had to say something. My voice came out hoarse, cracked. What was that?" She didn't look at me. She just shook her head slowly, still staring ahead. Her whole body was rigid. "I don't know," she said, her voice barely more than a breath. "I don't know what it was, but I am never, ever going back there." And she never has. I tried to talk to her about it a week later to try and make sense of it, to see if we saw the same details. She shut me down immediately. She said she didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to think about it ever again. She hasn't been fishing since. I've gone over it in my head 1,000 times. The way it stood, so still and so confident. The sheer size of it, the texture of its fur. But the thing that haunts me, the thing I see when I close my eyes at night, isn't its size or its strength. It's the eyes, those reddish-orange eyes glowing in that dappled sunlight, and the absolute, focused intelligence behind them. It wasn't just looking at a potential threat or a source of food. It was seeing me. It was recognizing that I was there, and it was thinking. I have no idea what it was thinking, but I know, with a certainty that chills me to the bone, that it was. I left my tackle box and my fishing rod out there. I could probably go back and find them, or what's left of them, but I won't. That part of the river, that whole bend, belongs to it now. I don't know what it was. I just know what I saw, and sometimes that's enough. Story 15. Okay, I'm just going to type this out. I've been putting it off for a while, but I need to get it down, if only so I can stop thinking about it so much. My hands are still a little unsteady thinking back on it, so forgive me if this is a bit of a mess. My name's not important. What is important is that I spent most of my adult life as a tracker working search and rescue. I know these woods, specifically the Bitterroot Range on the Idaho and Montana border, better than I know the streets of my own hometown. I've been in situations where people were lost, scared, hurt. I've been the one who was calm, the one who knew what to do. That all changed last October. It was October of 2019. I went back there for a reason, a personal one. When I was a kid, back in 1964, I saw something. My dad and I were camping, and I caught a glimpse of something massive and dark, moving through the trees, way off in the distance. It was just a glimpse, a shadow that shouldn't have been there, but it stuck with me my whole life. Everyone wrote it off as a bear, a trick of the light, a kid's imagination, but I knew. After I retired, the pull to go back, to actually find some kind of proof, just got stronger and stronger. I wasn't some crazy Bigfoot hunter with a camera crew. I was a tracker. I knew how to find things that didn't want to be found. So that's how I ended up there that morning. It was cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones the second you step out of the truck. The air smelled like damp pine and decay, that crisp, clean mountain smell I've always loved. I remember my breath pluming out in front of me, and the sun was just starting to hit the high peaks, turning them a soft orange. I felt good, hopeful even. This was it. I was going to settle a 55-year-old question. I was hiking along an old logging trail, one that's been mostly reclaimed by the forest. It was rough going, lots of downed trees and thick underbrush. I was moving slow, my eyes scanning the ground, the trees, everything. I had my pack with my supplies, a good camera, and my old hunting rifle. I've never been one to go into the deep woods without it, not because I'm paranoid, but because it's just common sense. You never know. I'd been hiking for a couple of hours, following the path of a creek bed that was mostly just a trickle that time of year. The ground was soft and muddy near the water, and that's where I saw it. My heart just about stopped. It was a footprint, but not like any bear track I've ever seen, and I've seen a lot. This thing was perfect. It was pressed deep into the mud, clear as day. It was huge, just massive. I dropped to my knees right there, my fingers hovering over the impression, not wanting to touch it and mess it up. I'm not a small guy, but I laid my hand next to it, and my hand looked like a child's. I'd estimate it was a solid 15 inches long. The toes were distinct, the ball of the foot, the arch. It wasn't a sloppy, blurred mess like a bear track often is when they're moving fast. This was a deliberate, weight-bearing step. The adrenaline hit me then, a cold, sharp rush. This was it. This was real. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with my pack. I had brought plaster casting materials, just on a hope. I mixed the plaster in my collapsible bucket with water from my canteen. My movements hurried, frantic almost. I kept looking over my shoulder, the feeling of being watched starting to prickle at the back of my neck. I wrote it off as excitement. I poured the plaster, smooth and careful, my eyes darting up every few seconds to scan the tree line. The forest was still quiet. Normal quiet. It felt like an eternity waiting for that cast to set. I just sat there on a damp log, staring at that white plaster filling the print, my rifle across my lap. The silence felt heavy. I remember noticing that the birds had stopped singing. Not all at once, I don't think, but gradually. I'd been so focused on the print I hadn't noticed the change. The chickadees, the jays, they were just gone. The only sound was the faint gurgle of the creek. That's when I heard the first snap. It was loud. Not a small twig, but a thick branch, the kind that takes some serious weight or force to break. It came from up on the ridge to my left. My head snapped up, my grip tightening on the rifle. I stayed perfectly still, listening. Nothing. Just that heavy, waiting silence. I told myself it was a moose or an elk, a big buck. Anything, but in my gut I knew. The way the sound had echoed, it felt deliberate. I packed up the cast, now firm and solid, wrapping it carefully in a towel and stowing it in my pack. My earlier excitement was gone, replaced by a low, humming anxiety. I decided to move, to get out of the creek bed and back to the main trail. I started hiking again, moving at a quicker pace now, and that's when the real unease set in. I heard movement. It was keeping pace with me, up on the ridge. I'd walk for a minute, and I'd hear the crunch of leaves, the snap of another branch, maybe 70, 100 yards away and slightly above me. I stopped dead. The movement stopped. I took a few more steps. A few seconds later, the movement started again, matching my rhythm almost exactly. My mouth went dry. This wasn't an animal just happening to move in the same direction. This was parallel tracking. I've done it myself, when I didn't want to startle a lost person or spook game. You move when they move. You stop when they stop. It's a way of shadowing someone without being seen. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. Under my wool cap, I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs. I've been scared in the woods before, but this was different. This was a deep, primal fear, the kind that lives in the oldest part of your brain. I was being hunted, or at the very least, I was being herded. I broke into a jog, my pack thumping against my back. The cast felt impossibly heavy. The movement on the ridge sped up to match me. I could hear it clearly now, a heavy bipedal thump, thump, thump through the duff, keeping perfect time with my own footfalls. I veered off the trail, crashing through a thicket of young pines, the branches whipping at my face and jacket. I didn't care. I just had to break the line of sight to get away from that relentless, pacing presence. I burst out of the thicket into a small clearing, maybe 40 yards across. The sun was higher now, streaming down into this little open space, lighting up the yellowing larch trees on the far side. I was panting, my lungs burning from the cold air and the panic. I stopped, bending over with my hands on my knees, trying to catch my breath and listen. The forest was dead silent. The movement had stopped. I straightened up, scanning the tree line where I'd just come from, expecting to see something emerge. Nothing. Then, for some reason, I turned and looked across the clearing, and I saw it. It was standing at the far edge of the trees, just inside the shadow line, motionless. My brain short-circuited. It couldn't process what I was seeing. It was tall. So damn tall. 8 feet, easy, maybe more. It was built like a powerlifter, with shoulders so impossibly broad they seemed to block out the trees behind it. It was covered in dark brown hair, long and shaggy, but it wasn't like a bear's fur. It looked almost weathered, like an old, worn-out coat. But the worst part was its face, or where its face should have been. It was just a dark shape under a heavy brow, but I could feel its eyes on me. I could feel it watching me. There was no aggression in its posture, no threat display. It was just standing there, observing. It was the most terrifying thing I have ever witnessed. A wave of pure, undiluted terror washed over me. It was a physical force. My legs felt like water. My bladder almost let go. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, to scream, to fire my gun. But my decades of training, that little voice of experience, screamed louder. Do not run. Do not make a sudden move. Do not challenge it. I didn't raise my rifle. I didn't even tighten my grip on it. I just started backing away, slowly, one careful, deliberate step at a time, my eyes locked on that figure. I didn't blink. I was afraid that if I looked away for even a second, it would be gone. Or worse, it would be right in front of me. It never moved. It just stood there, a statue of muscle and fur and silent, immense power, watching me retreat. I backed all the way across the clearing, my heels feeling for obstacles, until I felt the pine branches of the thicket behind me. I slipped back into the trees, never turning my back on it. The second I was shrouded in the shadows of the forest, I turned and ran. I don't remember the run back. It's a blur of panic and crashing through brush. I fell once hard, scraping my hands and knees on the rocks, but I scrambled back up without even feeling it. All I could think about was the truck. The truck was safety. The truck was the modern world. I finally broke out onto the main gravel road where I'd parked. My truck was there, a beat-up old Ford, looking like the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the lock. I threw my pack and rifle into the passenger seat, slammed the door, and cranked the engine. It roared to life. I sat there for a second, just gripping the steering wheel, my whole body trembling uncontrollably. I looked out at the wall of trees I'd just escaped from. Nothing, just quiet, peaceful forest. I put the truck in drive and started to pull away, my tires crunching on the gravel, and that's when I heard it. Thump. A single, loud, resonating knock on wood. It sounded like someone had taken a giant sledgehammer to the base of a hollow tree. The sound echoed through the valley, impossibly loud. I stomped on the brake, the truck skidding to a halt. A few seconds passed, silence. Then from a different part of the woods, farther away, another one answered. Thump! It was a call, a signal. I don't know how I knew, but I did. It was them telling each other something. Maybe that I was leaving. Maybe that I was no longer a threat. I didn't wait for a third. I slammed my foot on the gas and didn't look back. I drove for 2 hours straight before I even thought about slowing down. I have the plaster cast. It's sitting in my garage, wrapped in that same towel. I haven't shown it to anyone. What would I say? I went out looking for proof, and I found it. And it found me. I got exactly what I wanted, and it scared me so badly, I'll never go looking again. I've abandoned the whole quest. I finally accept it. That thing, the Sasquatch of the Bitterroot Mountains, it prefers to remain unseen. And after that day, so do I. I just go out to my garage sometimes and look at that cast, and my hands start to shake all over again. Okay. Story 16. The truck's a piece of junk, but the radio works. I had some classic rock station on low, just background noise, to keep my brain from shutting down completely after a 10-hour shift of stacking boxes. I remember the song was something by Boston, but I couldn't tell you which one. I was just coasting, my mind already halfway to my bed. The headlights cut a path through the absolute blackness. Out there, past the town limits, the streetlights just give up. If your headlights aren't on, you're blind. It's that kind of dark that feels solid. I was coming up on that long stretch between the old Miller farm and the river, where the fields open up on the right-hand side. It's just a huge, flat expanse of nothing most of the year, all churned up dirt and stubble after harvest. My lights swept across it like they always do, a routine fan of light over dark earth, and that's when I saw it. It wasn't standing still. It was moving. My brain, tired as it was, tried to file it away as a deer at first, a big buck standing on its hind legs, but it was too big, way too big, and it wasn't standing. It was walking, striding. My lights caught it from the side, and I could see the whole shape of it for maybe 2-3 seconds. It was tall. I mean, it had to be 7, maybe 8 feet tall. It was built thick. Not like a bodybuilder, all cut up, but like a powerlifter, or like a bear that decided to stand up straight and just keep going. Its shoulders were massive, just these huge slopes of muscle, and its arms were long, swinging as it moved. The body was covered in what looked like hair, but it was dark, a sort of blackish brown that just drank the light. It didn't have a neck, not really. Its head just sort of sat right on those huge shoulders. a dark lump. But the thing that froze the blood in my veins was the way it moved. It was crossing that field, heading east, away from the road, and it was moving with this purpose, this easy, powerful stride. The ground out there is uneven, all plough lines and dirt clods, stuff you'd trip over if you tried to run. This thing wasn't running, it was just walking, but it was covering ground faster than any human could ever run on that surface. It was effortless. Its legs, powerful and thick, just ate up the terrain. It didn't look once in my direction. It just kept going, a dark giant cutting across a dead field in the middle of the night. My foot instinctively lifted off the gas. The truck slowed to a crawl. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic, panicked drumbeat. My hands were clenched on the steering wheel, knuckles white. I just stared, my brain screaming at me that this was impossible. This is Illinois. We have deer, we have coyotes, we have the occasional raccoon that gets too bold. We don't have that. That's when I saw the headlights in my rearview mirror. Another car was coming up behind me. It slowed down, then pulled up alongside me in the opposite lane. It was a newer sedan, a Toyota or something. The driver, a guy maybe in his 40s with a tired-looking face, rolled down his passenger window. I fumbled for a second, my fingers numb, before I got my window down. The cold night air rushed in, but I didn't even feel it. "You okay?" he called over, his voice raised over the hum of our engines. "Car trouble." I just shook my head. I couldn't form words. I pointed a shaky finger out towards the field, towards where the thing was still moving, now maybe 100 yards out and getting smaller. The guy followed my gaze. He squinted. He saw it. I saw his face change in the glow of his dashboard lights. The casual concern melted away, replaced by pure, unadulterated confusion. His mouth opened slightly. We both watched it for another 5 seconds. It was just a dark, upright shape now, a silhouette against the slightly less black horizon, but you could still see the powerful swinging motion of its gait. It was unmistakable. The guy turned back to me, his eyes wide. "What the hell is that?" he asked, his voice quieter now, almost a whisper. I don't know," I managed to choke out. My own voice sounded strange to me, thin and reedy. He stared out at the field again, then back at me. He had this look on his face, like he was trying to solve a math problem in his head, and failing. "That ain't no deer," he said. I just shook my head again. He rubbed a hand over his face. "Looks big. You think it's a bear?" "I heard there's black bears up north sometimes, but we both knew it wasn't a bear. The proportions were all wrong. Bears on their hind legs are wobbly, top-heavy. They don't move with that kind of fluid, ground-eating power. They don't have that kind of striding, purposeful walk." He let out a short, nervous laugh. It was a hollow sound. "Man," he said, shaking his head, "Bigfoot. I'll be damned. Driving home on a Tuesday night, and I see Bigfoot." He said it as a joke, a desperate, deflecting joke to try and put a name on something that had no business having a name. But the moment he said it, the word just hung there in the cold air between our cars. Bigfoot. It made the impossible feel real, and that was 1,000 times more terrifying. He gave me one last look, a shared moment of pure, what the actual hell disbelief, and then he just waved a hand, rolled up his window, and drove off. His taillights shrank into the distance, and just like that, I was alone again. The silence in my truck was deafening. I could hear the faint tick of my cooling engine. I could hear my own ragged breathing. I looked back out at the field. The thing was gone. It had just vanished into the tree line at the far edge, a good quarter-mile away. It had crossed that entire distance in the time it took for that guy to pull up and have our 30-second conversation. That's when the real terror hit me. Not the shock, but the deep, cold, sinking terror. It was like a weight had dropped into my stomach. My skin was crawling with goosebumps. That other guy saw it too. I wasn't hallucinating. I wasn't tired. We both saw the same impossible thing. That shared sighting confirmed it. It was real, it was out there. I sat there for, I don't know how long, just staring at the empty field. My mind was racing, trying to find any other explanation. A person in a suit? No way. No person is that big, that powerfully built, and no one could move like that across that kind of ground. It was too dark for details, but the sheer mass of it, the way it occupied space, was all wrong for a human. It was something else. I finally forced my foot onto the gas pedal. The truck lurched forward. My eyes were glued to the field, scanning the tree line. Every shadow looked like it was moving. Every clump of dirt looked like a crouching form. My heart was still going crazy. I felt hyper-aware of everything. The vibration of the steering wheel, the sound of gravel under my tires, the way my shirt was sticking to my back with a cold sweat. I drove the rest of the way home, maybe 10 miles under the speed limit. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see that huge, dark shape loping along behind the truck, keeping pace with me. The familiar landmarks of my drive, the broken fence post, the old red barn, the turnoff for the state park, all looked different now. They felt like set pieces in a nightmare. I pulled into my driveway and killed the engine. I didn't get out right away. I just sat there listening. The normal night sounds, crickets, the rustle of leaves, sounded menacing. I was afraid to open the car door. I felt like a kid again, scared of the dark, convinced there was a monster in the closet. Only this time, the monster was real, and it was out in a field 20 miles away, and it could move faster than I could ever hope to. When I finally went inside, I locked the door and deadbolted it, something I never usually do. I went around and checked all the windows, making sure they were latched. My house felt small and fragile. I didn't sleep. I just sat on my couch in the dark, staring at the wall. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. That powerful, swinging walk. The sheer bulk of it silhouetted against the night. I keep replaying it in my head, the way my headlights swept over it, the casual way the other driver joked about it, the chilling ease with which it moved. It wasn't aggressive. It didn't look at me. It just was, and that might be the most frightening part of all. It was just going about its business, a creature that shouldn't exist in a place where it definitely shouldn't be, completely unaware or unconcerned that it was shattering my entire understanding of the world. I called in sick to work today. My boss asked if I was coming down with something, and I just said, yeah, not feeling well. How do you tell someone you didn't come to work because you saw a monster on the way home and now you're too scared to leave your house? The sun is up now. It's a perfectly normal, sunny day. But everything feels different. The world feels thinner, like there's a crack in it that I peered through, and I can't unsee what was on the other side. I keep looking out my window at the woods behind my house. They're just normal woods, but now they feel like they're hiding something. I don't know what it was. I don't know what it wanted. I just know that I saw it, someone else saw it, and now I have to live in a world where that thing is out there, walking through the Illinois night like it owns the place. And I guess maybe it does. Story 17. It was around 9 at night. The sun had been down for a while, and it was pitch black outside. No moon that I remember, just this heavy, dark sky. The road is this quiet 2-lane highway that cuts through the Canaveral marshlands. If you've never been out there, it's just nothing. Swamp on both sides, thick trees, and this feeling of being completely alone. My headlights were on high beam, cutting through the darkness, but it only showed maybe 100 feet ahead, and then everything just got swallowed up by the night. I was driving cautious, I remember that clearly. I always do on that road because of the deer. They jump out all the time, and hitting one would ruin your whole night, if not your car. My hands were at 10 and 2 on the wheel, my eyes scanning the edges of the road. The radio was on low, just some staticky classic rock station, but I wasn't really listening. I was just focused on the road, the yellow lines ticking by, the hum of my tires on the asphalt. It was so quiet out there. No other cars, I hadn't seen another set of headlights for maybe 20 minutes. It was just me and the dark and the swamp. The air coming through the vents smelled faintly of damp earth and something else, something sweet and rotten, like the marsh was breathing. Then it happened. It came out of nowhere. 1 second, the road was empty. The next, this thing burst out from the right side of the road. I say burst, but that doesn't really cover it. It didn't just run out, it exploded from the tree line. One moment, nothing. The next, this massive shape was just there, in the middle of my headlights. My heart just stopped. I mean, it felt like it froze in my chest. My foot slammed on the brake, but I didn't even have time to skid. It all happened so fast. It was huge. I'm not talking bare huge. I'm talking, I don't even know. It had to be 7, 8 feet tall, easy. And it was covered in this long, dark hair. Not fur, really. It was like hair, thick and matted, and it was flowing backward as it moved. Like it was wet or just moving so fast the air was pushing it back. Its body was muscular, isn't the right word. It was powerful. Thick legs, massive shoulders that bunched up when it moved, and it moved like nothing I've ever seen. It didn't run like a man or like a gorilla. It took these 2 long, smooth steps. Just 2. The first step put it in the middle of the road, right in the full glare of my headlights. The second step carried it all the way across the other lane and onto the left embankment. The whole thing took maybe 2 seconds, but in those 2 seconds, my headlights gave me a perfect, horrifyingly clear view. Its head was cone-shaped, not pointy, but like a rounded cone, wider at the shoulders and tapering up. I saw its profile when it leaped from the road to the embankment. It had an ape-like face, but flatter, a strong, heavy jaw, and its eyes. I don't remember seeing its eyes, which is maybe weirder. I just remember the shape of its head. The dark hair on its face was minimal, so you could see the structure of it. It was primal, ancient. Its feet were oversized. I saw that clearly when it pushed off for its jump. They were long, like a human's, but bigger, and it used them to propel itself with this incredible force. It didn't scramble up the embankment. It leaped. It just launched itself from the road, cleared the shallow ditch and vanished into the wall of trees and saw palmetto on the left side. And then it was gone, just like that. The road was empty again. My car was still rolling forward, my foot still jammed on the brake, bringing me to a slow, stupid stop right there in the middle of the lane. The engine was idling. The radio was still playing some old Tom Petty song, but everything was different. I couldn't breathe. I was just sitting there, gripping the steering wheel so hard, my knuckles were white. My heart wasn't just beating fast. It was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, painful thumping. I felt cold all over, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead and my back, even though the AC wasn't on. I stared at the spot where it had disappeared. The darkness there was absolute. My headlights just hit the first line of trees and stopped, unable to penetrate any deeper. It was in there, somewhere in that blackness. What the hell was that? That was the first thought. It wasn't a bear. I've seen black bears in Florida. They're big, but they don't move like that. They don't have that kind of smooth, powerful gait. They don't have cone-shaped heads, and they sure as hell aren't that tall. This thing was taller than any bear, and it moved on 2 legs with a purpose, with a fluidity that was terrifying. It wasn't a person. No person is built like that. No person can cover the entire width of a 2-lane road in 2 steps and then leap a ditch like it was nothing. My mind was racing, trying to find a box to put it in, some kind of animal I could recognize. A feral human, a sick gorilla, nothing fit. The shape, the size, the speed. It was all wrong. It was something else. The terror didn't hit me all at once. It was like a wave that built up after the initial shock. It started in my gut, this cold, sinking feeling, and then it spread through my whole body. I was shaking. My hands were trembling on the wheel. I felt this primal, deep-seated fear. The kind of fear that isn't about being hurt, but about seeing something that shouldn't exist, something that breaks the rules of the world, you know. I looked in my rearview mirror, nothing but black. I looked to the right, where it had come from. Same thing, just an impenetrable wall of night and swamp. I was completely exposed, sitting in a stupid metal box in the middle of this empty road with that thing out there. I remembered then that I had no cell service. I'd checked earlier. No bars. Nothing. If I broke down, if something happened, I was on my own until another car happened by, and who knew when that would be? I couldn't stay there. My body moved before my brain did. My foot came off the brake and pressed down on the gas. The engine revved, too loud in the silence. The car lurched forward. I didn't even think about turning around. The only thought in my head was, "Get out of here." I sped up, my eyes glued to the road, but my peripheral vision was screaming, scanning the trees on both sides. Every shadow was a threat. Every rustle of leaves in the wind, was it the wind, made me flinch. I drove faster, way over the speed limit, my heart still pounding in my throat. The yellow lines became a blur. I kept expecting to see it again, to see it step out in front of me, or to see it running alongside the car, keeping pace. I glanced at the passenger side mirror, half expecting to see a dark shape keeping up with me. But there was nothing, just the empty road behind me, swallowed by the night. The next 10 miles were the longest of my life. Every curve in the road, I expected it to be there. Every break in the trees, I expected to see those long, powerful legs moving. I didn't slow down until I saw the first lights of the town up ahead, the glow in the sky that meant people and safety. When I finally pulled into my driveway, my hands were still shaking. I sat there for a few minutes, just listening to the engine tick as it cooled down. I couldn't get the image out of my head. That dark, flowing hair, the cone-shaped head silhouetted in my headlights, the effortless, powerful way it moved. It was burned into my brain. Later, when I'd calmed down a little, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear, a really big, weird-looking bear. Maybe it was chasing a deer. That made some sense. The thing had come from the right and gone to the left, like it was following something. But deer don't move like that, and bears don't move like that. The sheer speed and the distance it covered in 2 steps. It wasn't right. I thought about the skunk ape. Every Florida kid hears the stories. The big, smelly ape thing that lives in the swamp. It's a campfire story, a local legend. I never believed it, not for a second. It was just a fun story, like the Loch Ness Monster. But that night, what I saw, it fit. The description fit. The size, the hair, the way it moved, the sheer raw power of it. I've never driven down State Road 407 at night again. I'll take the long way around, even if it adds 20 minutes to my trip. During the day, it's fine, it's just a road. But at night, no, I can't do it. The memory is too sharp, too real. Sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night, I'll think about it. I'll picture it standing there in the road, frozen in the headlights for that split second. And I'll wonder, what was it? Where did it go? Was it really chasing something? Or was it just crossing the road, going about its business in a world that it owns? A world we only think we understand? I don't know. I'll probably never know. All I know is what I saw with my own eyes. And that's enough to keep me away from that stretch of road forever when the sun goes down. It's its territory, not mine. I learned that lesson on September 17th, 2011, at around 9 o'clock at night, and that's a lesson I'm never going to forget. Story 18. Okay, so I've never really talked about this much, except to a few people over the years. And even then, I always downplay it because who's gonna believe me, right? But it's been eating at me lately, and I figure if I don't get it out, it'll just keep festering. This happened back in 1962 when I was 15 years old. My dad and my granddad decided to take me on a hunting trip out to Central Oregon, deep in the Cascades. It was supposed to be this fun father-son thing, a way to bond and teach me the ropes, but it turned into something else entirely, something that still gives me the creeps when I think about it too hard. We'd driven out there in my dad's beat-up truck, the kind that rattled on every bump, and the air smelled like pine and damp earth the whole way. I remember feeling excited, but also a little nervous because I wasn't the most outdoorsy kid. My granddad was this tough old guy who'd fought in the war, and my dad was pretty stern, so I didn't want to mess up or look scared in front of them. We set up camp by this lake. I can't recall the name now, but it was one of those secluded spots where the water was so clear you could see the bottom, and the trees crowded right up to the shore. It felt isolated, like we were the only people for miles, which I guess we were. That day, we'd spent hours hiking around, looking for deer tracks, but we hadn't seen much. The air was getting cooler as evening approached, and the sky started turning this orangey-purple color. My dad suggested we climb up to this rock ledge that overlooked the lake to get a better view before it got dark. The ledge was about 20 feet up, and it was kind of a scramble to get there. Loose rocks and slippery moss underfoot. I remember my boots slipping a couple of times, and my dad had to grab my arm to steady me. Once we were up there, the view was amazing. You could see the whole lake stretched out, with the mountains rising behind it, all shadowy and imposing. We were just standing there, catching our breath, when my granddad pointed across the water. At first, I thought it was a bear or something, but then I saw it clearly. This dark, upright figure moving along the opposite shore. It was huge, way bigger than any man I'd ever seen, and covered in this rough, shaggy hair that looked almost black in the fading light. But what really got me was what it was carrying, a full-grown deer slung over its shoulder like it was nothing. The deer's legs were dangling, and I could see the shape of its body, all limp and heavy. This thing was just walking steady and calm, like it had every right to be there. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I glanced at my dad and granddad, and their faces were frozen in this stunned silence. No one said a word. We all just watched, completely mesmerized and terrified at the same time. Then, the creature started climbing this steep, jagged ridge on the far side of the lake. The ridge was maybe 30 feet high, all unstable rock and loose shale, the kind of stuff you'd think nothing could climb without slipping. But this thing moved with this effortless grace, like it was walking up a gentle slope. Its feet found holds I couldn't even see, and it never slowed down, not even for a second. The deer on its shoulder didn't seem to bother it at all. It was like carrying a backpack. I remember my breath catching in my chest, and I had this cold sweat breaking out on my back. My dad later said he tried to climb a lower part of that ridge the next day and couldn't get more than a few feet up. It was too treacherous, too slippery. But this thing scaled it like it was nothing, its muscles rippling under that dark hair. The sheer size and strength of it defied belief. I'm not exaggerating when I say it felt like watching something supernatural, something that shouldn't exist in this world. The way it moved was too smooth, too powerful, and it sent this primal fear right through me. As it climbed higher, I could hear the faint crunch of rocks under its feet, but no other sounds, no heavy breathing, no grunts, nothing. It was eerily quiet, like the forest itself was holding its breath. The sun had dipped below the mountains by then, and the shadows were getting longer, making everything feel even more ominous. I remember my granddad gripping my shoulder so tight it hurt, and his hand was trembling. He was a tough guy, never showed fear, but in that moment, I could feel how scared he was too. My dad just stood there, his jaw clenched, like he was trying to process what he was seeing. When the creature reached the top of the ridge, it paused for a second, and I swear it turned its head slightly, as if it knew we were watching. I couldn't see its face clearly. It was too far away. But I got this chill down my spine, like it was looking right at us. Then it disappeared over the crest, and the forest went back to normal, like nothing had happened. But the air felt different, heavier, like the weight of what we'd seen was pressing down on us. We didn't move for what felt like ages. Finally, my dad whispered, "We need to get back to camp." His voice was shaky, and I'd never heard him sound like that before. We climbed down from the ledge in silence, our footsteps careful and slow, like we were afraid of making noise. Every little sound, a twig snapping, the water lapping at the shore, made me jump. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. Was it a bear? But bears don't walk upright like that, and they sure as hell don't carry deer over their shoulders with that kind of ease. And the climb, no animal I'd ever heard of could do that on such unstable ground. Back at camp, we built a fire, but none of us felt like talking. The flames crackled and popped, casting dancing shadows on the trees around us, and every time a branch rustled, I'd tense up, half expecting to see that figure emerge from the darkness. My dad kept staring into the woods, his rifle across his lap, like he was on guard duty. My granddad just sat there, puffing on his pipe, but his hands weren't steady. I could tell he was spooked too. I tried to sleep that night, but it was impossible. I kept replaying the sight in my head. The dark shape, the effortless climb, the deer. I'd close my eyes and see it moving, and I'd jerk awake, my heart hammering. The forest, sounds that usually felt comforting, the owls hooting, the wind in the pines, now seemed threatening, like they were hiding something. I remember curling up in my sleeping bag, pulling it tight around me, but I still felt exposed. The cold seeped into my bones, and every little noise made me shiver. At one point I heard something heavy moving in the distance, and I sat bolt upright, straining to listen. It might have just been an animal, but in my head, it was that thing coming back for us. The next morning, we packed up early and left without much discussion. On the way back, my dad tried to lighten the mood, talking about the fishing we'd do next time, but it felt forced. We never really spoke about what we saw until years later, when Bigfoot stories started popping up in the news, and then it was like, oh, so that's what it might have been. But back then, we didn't have a name for it. It was just this terrifying, unexplainable thing that happened in the woods. To this day, I can't shake the memory. It's embedded in my mind, like a scar that never fully heals. The terror of witnessing something that powerful, that impossible, changed how I see the wild. I used to think nature was predictable, something you could master with a rifle and some skills. But that day taught me otherwise. There are things out there that don't fit into any box, things that defy logic and leave you questioning everything. And sometimes when I'm alone in the quiet, I still feel that chill, like I'm 15 again, watching from that rock ledge, utterly stunned and afraid. Story 19. Okay, so I've been sitting on this for a while, but I need to get it out there. I've never told anyone besides my uncle, and even he doesn't like talking about it, but it's one of those things that just eats at you, you know? I'm writing this, because if I don't, I feel like I'm going to burst. This happened about 5 years ago, but it feels like yesterday. I still get chills thinking about it. It was early October, and my uncle and I were up in Gunnison County, Colorado, elk hunting. We'd been doing this trip together since I was a teenager, and it was kind of our thing. That year, we decided to try an area near Fossil Ridge. We'd heard it was good for elk, but it was pretty remote, which we liked. Less people, more peace and quiet, or so we thought. We started out before sunrise, like we always do. The air was crisp, and you could see your breath. I remember pulling my jacket tighter because there was a bite to the wind that morning. We parked the truck off this old Forest Service road and hiked in with our gear. My uncle had his rifle, a .30-06, and I had mine. We were both experienced hunters, so we knew what we were doing. Or at least, we thought we did. The plan was to spend the whole day out there, maybe bag an elk if we got lucky. The woods were thick with pines and aspens, and the ground was covered in a mix of pine needles and dry leaves. Every step crunched under our boots, which is why we tried to move slow and quiet. But you know how it is. Sometimes you just can't help making noise. We'd been walking for a couple of hours, not seeing much. A few squirrels, some birds, but no elk. We were following a game trail that wound through the trees, heading uphill toward a spot my uncle had scouted on a map. He's the kind of guy who studies topo maps for fun, so he knew the area pretty well, or so we thought. Around mid-morning, maybe 10 o'clock or so, I started noticing this smell. At first, I thought it was just something rotting, maybe a dead animal or something, but it was different. It was strong, like a mix of wet dog and garbage, but with this weird, sweet undertone that made my stomach turn. I mentioned it to my uncle, and he nodded, saying he'd been smelling it too for the last few minutes. We both stopped for a second, just sniffing the air. It was getting stronger, and it seemed to be coming from the east, toward a small ridge we could see through the trees. Now, in hunting, you learn to pay attention to smells because they can lead you to animals. But this wasn't elk. Elk smell musky. But this was something else entirely. It was overpowering, like it was clinging to the air. My uncle gestured for us to follow it, just out of curiosity. Maybe it was a bear or something, he said. Bears can smell pretty rank, especially if they've been feeding on carcasses. So we started heading east, toward the ridge. The smell got stronger with every step. It was so thick it felt like I could taste it in the back of my throat. I remember wiping my nose because it was making my eyes water a little. The terrain was uneven, with lots of rocks and fallen logs, so we had to watch our step. The sun was higher now, casting long shadows through the trees, but the air still felt cool. As we got closer to the ridge, I started hearing something. At first, it was just a faint sound, like rocks clacking together. I thought it might be a marmot or something, but it was too rhythmic. Then there were these low, grunting sounds, like something big was breathing heavy. My uncle held up a hand, signaling for me to stop. We both froze, listening. The grunting was deep, almost guttural, and it sent a shiver down my spine. It didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard. We crouched down behind some bushes, trying to see what was making the noise. The ridge was maybe 50 yards ahead, and we could see the top of it. The sound was coming from the other side. My uncle whispered for us to move slowly, and we started creeping forward, using the trees for cover. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel the adrenaline starting to kick in. This wasn't normal hunting jitters, this was something else. We reached the base of the ridge and started climbing up. It wasn't steep, but it was rocky, and we had to be careful not to slip. The smell was almost unbearable now, like we were right on top of whatever was causing it. The grunting and rock banging were louder too, echoing a little in the quiet of the woods. I remember thinking that whatever it was big, and it was close. When we topped the ridge, we looked down into a dry creek bed below. And that's when I saw it. My brain didn't process it at first. It was just this large, dark brown figure squatting in the creek bed. It was huge, way bigger than a man, and it was hunched over, banging two rocks together. The rocks were about the size of my fists, and it was hitting them together in this steady, deliberate rhythm. Thump, 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 and with each thump it let out this low grunt like it was concentrating. I froze, and I could feel my uncle tense up beside me. We were both just staring, unable to move. The creature was maybe 30 feet away, and I could see it clearly. Its fur was matted and dark, almost black in some places, and it had these broad shoulders. It was squatting, so I couldn't tell how tall it was, but it looked massive. The way it moved was smooth, not jerky like an animal, but more fluid, like it knew what it was doing. Then, it stopped banging the rocks and went still. It must have heard us or sensed us, because it turned its head slowly toward us, and that's when I saw its face. Oh God, that face. It wasn't a bear, and it wasn't a human. It had these deep-set eyes that were dark and intelligent, and a flat nose, and its mouth was kind of set in a grimace. The skin around its eyes and mouth was darker, almost black, and it had this expression that I can only describe as curious but menacing. It locked eyes with me, and for a second, everything just stopped. I felt this cold dread wash over me, like I was looking at something that wasn't supposed to exist. In one smooth motion, it rose to its full height, and it was tall. I'd say at least 6.5 feet, maybe more. It didn't stumble or hesitate, it just stood up, and I could see how powerful its legs were. Then, without any warning, it leaped across the dry creek bed. It jumped like it was nothing, clearing maybe 15 feet in one bound. It landed on the other side and started running up the slope into the pines and aspens. Its movement was so fast and effortless, it was like watching a ghost. It didn't make a sound as it ran, just vanished into the trees. The whole thing probably took less than 10 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. I was still frozen, my heart hammering against my ribs. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and loud. My uncle was gripping my arm so hard it hurt. We just stood there, staring at the spot where it had disappeared. The smell was still there, strong as ever, and now it felt like it was clinging to us. After a minute, my uncle let go of my arm and whispered, "What the hell was that?" His voice was shaky, and I could see the fear in his eyes. I didn't have an answer. I've seen bears, moose, even cougars, but nothing like that. Nothing that moved like that or looked like that. We slowly made our way down into the creek bed, both of us keeping our rifles ready, even though whatever it was had already gone. The ground was dry and rocky, and we could see where it had been squatting. There were 2 rocks on the ground, both chipped and worn from being banged together. My uncle picked one up, and it was heavy with sharp edges. He dropped it like it was hot, and we both just looked at each other. We didn't see any tracks or anything else, just those rocks and the lingering smell. The sun was starting to get lower in the sky, casting long shadows, and we both knew we needed to get out of there. We didn't say much as we packed up and started heading back toward the truck. Every sound in the woods made me jump. A twig snapping, a bird calling, even the wind in the trees. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see those dark eyes staring back at me. We reached the truck as the light was fading, and we drove back to camp in silence. That night we didn't talk about it much. We just sat by the fire, drinking coffee and staring into the flames. Every now and then, one of us would bring it up, but we'd quickly change the subject. It was too raw, too scary. We never went back to that area again. We finished the hunting trip, but we stuck to more open areas, places where we could see for miles. We didn't see any elk that year, but honestly, I didn't care. I just wanted to go home. To this day, I have no idea what that thing was. I've read stories online about Bigfoot or Sasquatch, and some of them sound similar. The smell, the rock banging, the size, but I don't know. Part of me doesn't want to know. All I know is that I saw something that day that I can't explain, and it left me with this deep, lingering fear. Sometimes, when I'm out in the woods alone, I'll catch a whiff of something foul or hear a strange noise, and my heart will start racing all over again. I guess some things you just can't forget, no matter how hard you try.